Chapter 5, Summer Smells Sweet for the Tasmanian Tiger. Upon arriving back in Tasmania from our Moldovan summer, Mary had us right back to work on our business so that we could again take our Christmas break with Magda, who was due back by then. One of the first things we needed to do was agree on the rebranding of our business with a flashier logo and a more progressive image. For this task, Mary had hired an image consulting outfit from Sydney. Boom or Splat or something like that. Impact Labs or Impact Laboratories Proprietary Limited, I believe, is going to be our new name, and the stock code is ILP. The new signs will go up out front and on all the outbuildings. Stationery and such is all new this morning with the new logo on it, so do not use the old garbage. If I see you using an old pen with the old logo, I will smack your hand. Put everything old in the bin to be taken to Halls Falls, where they can serve our guests there, Mary said all in one breath. Magda was having a busy time with her work as well. Ian had her working with Richard in India on the celestial mapping project, as well as some additional information on astronomy that he gleaned from the Brigu documents. In addition, she was working with Vesna Mandic in Serbia before she left for India to help her free her consciousness and gain access to ideas and memories that she feels are buried deep within her memory. Magda has many methods she can employ to help someone access their inner self. Are they magic? I prefer to think of them as undiscovered science. She was also now joined with Gorby as well as Peepers, and I don't know whether or not that connection wears on her when they are apart. The joining required a considerable amount of her time prior to her leaving for India. Florin told me that their approach with Gorby will be quite different than with Peepers, because he won't be expected to do circus-style tricks. Otherwise, Magda would need to spend at least the rest of this year training him for one or two easy tricks. I didn't think to ask what he was being trained for. Magda told me, when the car came to take me to the airport, I watched Gorby and Peepers follow it to the main gate out of the back window. I wish they could join the girls in Tasmania. Her Christmas visit was becoming a nice tradition that everyone was looking forward to. Even Mabel and Gordon asked if they should be making message sticks to announce her coming. I did hear from Cheesy on the sly that Stephanie will be coming for Christmas this year as well. It would be worth my life if I were to divulge that I knew that piece of information to anyone. Mary was also focused on her last two PhD candidates, Errol and I, of course. At that moment Uncle Artis was home to stay for a while in Hobart from his second home in Halls Falls just to give us a personal update. Our 4 surviving female tigers were almost 6 months old by that time. Maddie, Karma, Dharma, and Amelia could all now permanently leave the pouch and wander about the enclosure where they spent their time together. Each still had her own pouch-type hanging home or bed to return to and sleep in at night, but many times they paired up and slept together. Karma and Dharma paired up, as did Maddie and Amelia for some reason Uncle Artis told us. He added, they look like dogs, but they behave more like friggin' cats. Amelia is a real sweetheart and always comes to wag her tail at me and then rubs up against me if I'm in the cage. She can look awkward when she's moving at times, but really she's very agile and it just looks a tad odd from where you're standing. They like to play follow the leader, and TMer has built them an obstacle course that they follow. The boys are thinking about building a bit on the back of the kennel to give them a bit of a runway. For the next round of cloning, our tiger ladies won't be ready at their tender age to become surrogate mothers, so another round of cloning using our precious mama devils is in order. We must continue to build our breeding stock of tigers and make an impact. At that point we plan to embed 2 embryos in each of our devils for this birthing session rather than one, with the intention of removing them both to the incubator immediately. Gestation for anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks, and then over the next 10 weeks from the artificial teat until they open their little eyes. They'll stay in the pouch for a few weeks and then eventually manage to venture out. At about 4 months, they should be out of the woods and stable new kennel mates for their older sisters. It will be interesting to see how they react to them. With Magda off on her other duties and our expanding kennel requirements, we had a need to hire additional workers for Halls Falls. That was an extremely risky venture for us to expose our 4 young ladies to people who may or may not see things from the same perspective as the rest of us. We were jeopardizing their futures, so we had to be cautious. Errol volunteered for the task. Let me take care of this one gentleman. Just save the weekend after next for a road trip. I'll show you how I would have handled final year at your Scottish prep school. As it turned out, the University of Hobart was hosting a biology conference with all the other Australian universities sending exhibitors, which was ending at the end of next week. That meant that as of Friday, the participants would be returning to the mainland, except those invited by Errol to attend a weekend party at Stephanie's uncle's cottage on Lake Gordon. Between Errol, Cheesy and Stephanie, they were able to come up with 10 people to invite, along with our crew, to Lake Gordon. Errol said they set up a number of tents alongside the cottage and made it an event. Stefan was not able to be there because she was committed to the Sultancy with things at critical points for her corals and such. Her uncle Nevin Trifford rented his cottage and property to our company, and he became part of our deception. When the 3 uncles were together, Cheesy liked to refer to them as the 3 Goonis. I meant to ask him later which was which, but I doubt if any would have been flattered. I remember heading across the Tasman Bridge that Friday night thinking we were about to expand our group of friends and employees exponentially. There was a party atmosphere in the air, and after all, Cheesy was there, so we couldn't say it would have been better if he were there. Our trip out of Hobart took us along Highway 1 following the River Derwent all the way. It changed to the Lyell Highway at one point and then the A10 for a while, but always stayed with the river. Terrain changed a bit when the road changed its name to Glenora Road, but the river was still there as an ever-present patron saint of roads. Whales could actually swim up to this point, I would think, at least until the fresh water. Bull sharks certainly easily make it this far and have been found hundreds of kilometers upriver. Finally, we hit the area known as Glenora proper, but it was much ado about nothing. Considering the length of the road, it deserved a much larger hamlet. At least the road changed names to something more optimistic going forward, Gordon River Road. We left the side of the Derwent River now and changed elevations as we entered the national park area. Gordon River Road took us through to Fitzgerald, where we stopped to get out and take a look around at some spectacular country. Before we reached Florentine, we crossed over the highest part of the Gordon River Road. From that point on, Errol was navigating by GPS because the roads were very sketchy in this area and it became more wilderness and denser bush. Old-growth forest closed in on all sides of us. Eventually, our cars burst through the trees, and there was a beautiful 2-story wood cottage set on an idyllic lake with a dock stretching out into a calm lake, reflecting the forest around it. We immediately got out of the cars and walked out onto the dock when we arrived to soak in the vista of the lake and breathe in the crisp Tasmanian air. I could hear a wind chime in the distance, and I closed my eyes and thought of Windhaven. The illusion didn't fool me. Next to the dock was a huge fire pit for the festivities, and as we looked back towards the cottage, we could see tents set up on both sides for partying and eating. Further over on the other side, closer to the forest, tents were set up for sleeping. All 10 candidates knew that they were applying for several 3-month jobs with our company, and all 10 candidates were provided by Stephanie, who knew people at the University of Melbourne that could direct some good people our way. What was also attracting them was the Tossie Triple Challenge that we were hosting with prize money of $5,000 AUD. We were now 10 years older than most of these potential little genius, and it was making Errol and I feel old. Never cheesy though, he and the Jacks were ageless. Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur had teamed up with Uncle Nevin in running the events and moving people to and from where they needed to be. Tiemer and Travis had recruited Rab and V. Oswin to help them set up camp, feed our guests and run the equipment required for the challenges. Everything in Tasmania seems to have a history. Lake Gordon was a human-made reservoir created by the Gordon Dam on the upper reaches of the Gordon River in the southwest part of Tasmania. This is extremely rugged country, with plenty of remote dense forest that is almost impregnable. Would convince you how easy it would be for thylacines to avoid humans because there are no humans here. Lake Gordon was formed 50 years ago as the result of a dam constructed by the Hydroelectricity Commission of Tasmania. It was the largest and most controversial hydroelectric power scheme in Tasmanian history, with a catchment area of 1,280 square kilometers. It made Lake Gordon Tasmania's largest lake, with a surface area of almost 300 square kilometers almost immediately. That's a lot of shoreline in a very remote area where we can place animals that you may or may not want to ever be seen by people. Lake Petter is connected to Lake Gordon through the McPartlands Pass Canal to add access to a few thousand more kilometers. There was a nasty side to the issue when the Hawke-led Australian government overturned a decision by the Tasmanian government to dam the lower Gordon River. When the Tasmanian government refused to halt work in the UNESCO-listed World Heritage Area, the Australian government successfully sought a ruling in the High Court of Australia in that well-known lawsuit of Commonwealth v Tasmania. The lower Gordon was not dammed. Well, I'll be damned. Although technically Canadian, I don't remember teaming up against Tasmania behind the Cape of the Commonwealth. 10 years ago, the lowest ever water levels in the lake were recorded during the Tasmanian energy crisis. There's still plenty of water for our first canoe challenge, but exposed shoreline exists everywhere. We're looking to a future where we hope to be releasing breeding pairs of thylacines into the remote area around Lake Gordon, so this weekend we'll hopefully find the people that enjoy working and living in this outdoor Tasmanian environment, as well as those who favor the de-extinction of our ladies. Our Saturday morning event was a canoe challenge, with the only real value to the candidates being a determination of the animal they will represent in the quiz challenge later that night. At the bonfire, they will compete for additional side prizes as well as their position for the start of the third challenge for all the chips, which is the scavenger hunt on the final day. Each candidate will be supplied with a disposable telephone which will allow them to capture images of the organisms on their lists. Each organism on the list has a value, and they have until 3 p.m. to turn in their phones and accumulate points. They can make up whatever point they fall behind at the Saturday night quiz challenge with a great performance on scavenger day. Errol's plan to determine who was sympathetic to the plight of the thylacine and who wasn't involved 5 of the candidates being emailed a video of Amelia and Maddie frolicking together as if in the wild from Travis. The other 5 would receive the same video from Tiemer. In the email, they will mention that someone was paying a bounty for the capture of a live thylacine, and if they want to help them capture them, they will get half the reward. If you're interested, meet me at the following GPS coordinates. Travis and Tiemer planted trail cams overseeing the coordinates to record who showed and who didn't. In fact, 2 of the candidates emailed Travis back telling him he was a piece of crap for exposing the poor creatures. They should be left alone to exist in this world without our interference. Needless to say, we found a use for both of them. Friday night was a crisp, clear evening and a great night for a big bonfire at the lake, if ever there was one. The uncles had set up a barbecue and a bar and strung lights around the fire and down to the lake. Evening swims were not out of the question, but at this time of year a new law of science was introduced to some known as the law of shrinkage. Tmer and Travis began the entertainment, but that group was not short of talent, and when it came to opening up amongst their peers, this was a bunch of introverts turned extroverts. Cheesy had done this before. They got to know each other that night for the canoe challenge the next day. Our group of candidates included 5 men and 5 women. I'm not sure that was by design, but for a role that requires knowledge and intelligence, the gender shouldn't really matter. Unfortunately, there were many people in our industry that didn't see it that way, believing the hiring process should be equal for men and women even if gender creates no bias. The only bias is theirs, and we didn't want to agitate their pendulums unnecessarily. The way around something like that was to evaluate your candidates and select the ones you honestly want to proceed. If that group is skewed towards men, then balance it with women or vice versa. However, those additional affirmative action placements probably will only gain experience from inclusion in the process. Stephanie Murdoch's younger sister Lily was one of our candidates in that challenge, as well as Julie Andrews, Donna Douglas, Pearl Bailey, and Aaron St. Innes. The men included Rob Connor, Donald Brennan, Aaron Golden, and the 2 dicks, as Cheesy nicknamed them, Richard Ronson and Rick Evans. They hailed from several different Australian universities, but mostly from Melbourne, which offered the types of programs necessary to do the work our company was currently invested in. Melbourne was also the home of Dr. Terry Trask, the man who sequenced the thylacine genome from badly fragmented ancient samples and would have likely brought it back if we hadn't beaten him to it. I hope he doesn't try, not knowing we've already done it. The canoe challenge was Cheesy's brainchild and the reason we were bringing Lorenzo to Tasmania this summer. It carried a 1,000 Australian dollars bonus side prize for a pair of winners from the same canoe. The challenge was about creating exceptional tracking devices that could be broadcast to a real-time internet site for tracking all over the island of Tasmania. We would know where every single animal we were tracking was located, as well as many of their physical attributes 24/7. Between Lorenzo and Cheesy, they'll create the tool this summer and implement it here and at Windhaven as well next year for some of the poaching targets that need additional protecting now. Our fight against the black bee was now in full swing, and we were planning for the future. Cheesy and Lorenzo had taken it on as their personal challenge. They probably played a lot of role-playing games together in the States and may have slipped out of reality for this one. Maybe they're planning on tracking a few bees. Each contestant was to team up with another contestant and would be given a GPS location and a canoe. They would navigate, as a team, in the canoe to somewhere on Lake Gordon, pick up the item and return it to base camp. Then they would switch partners and do it again for a total of 5 trips to complete the challenge. Points awarded in the canoe challenge were based on time calculations and contents of the bags and would determine the animal costume they would wear tonight. The bonus prize was included in the bag of one of the targets they were sent out to find. Lucky Lily, as Cheesy nicknamed her, and her partner Rob Connor found the special prize pouch and split the 1,000 Australian dollars bonus price. The next event, after a big barbecue dinner, was the much-anticipated quiz night. Travis and Tmer had erected 4 screens facing different sides of the fire pit. The audience, that included everyone not participating, sat in the middle around the fire pit facing out at the contestants paired up at the screens. The challenge was simple. On the screen, each player had one side of a chessboard. On the home row lay 8 pieces, either black or white. The object was to move one of your pieces to the other player's home row to win the challenge. In order to move one of your pieces, you had to answer the question presented to you on the other side of the board. Correctly answer within 1 minute and you could advance one of your pieces 1 spot in any direction. Should the other player occupy that spot, you could eliminate their piece. Simple. We watched the challenge with great interest. The questions were extremely difficult and kept all the candidates on their toes. A player was presented a question on the screen, and if they answered correctly, they could advance one of their players forward to eventually gain a win, but there was strategy in the movements. A win was important, but also the number of questions it took to defeat your opponent could add up against you in this tournament-style play. Each player had to play 3 matches in the first round, from which 8 semifinalists emerged. The next round was an elimination round resulting in a group of 4 for the semifinal, and eventually only 2 survived for the final. Players eliminated in the first round would start scavenger day with 0 total credits. Quarterfinalists would receive 50 points while semifinalists would each get 100. The winner and the runner-up would be awarded 200 and 150 points respectively. Very significant head starts towards winning the $5,000 prize. Cheesy was the master of ceremonies for our quiz night and introduced each of our costume-clad contestants as they took the stage. Working with him on stage were Rab and V, dressed in costumes as twin Bennett's wallabies, or as Cheesy referred to the species as the Chippendale wallabies. Rab and V were not particularly tall, so they fit the costumes, but they looked like a couple of Peter the Rabbits. Every time V would wrinkle her nose and adjust her glasses, Uncle Arthur would poke me with his elbow, then point at V with his finger and laugh like a little schoolgirl. He thought it was the funniest thing he ever saw, and I tried to tell him it was rude, but he didn't see as rude, just funny. Cheesy began, "Put your hands together to welcome the spotted handfish, better known as Brachyonychthys hirsutus. This rare Australian bloke hails from the handfish family, living down the coast. Our friend is classified as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List of 2020. The handfish did a little twirl. With a highly restricted range, limited only to the estuary of the Derwent River, the main threat to his miserable existence is an invasive species known as the dreaded northern Pacific sea star, Asterias amurensis." "Boo," hiss, went up from the crowd. Cheesy continued, "Portraying the noble handfish is Rob." Rob pranced across the stage, shaking his highly adapted pectoral fins at his adoring fans. He named his character Kai, the last of the brooding handfish, after the last of the Brunangi. He combed his hair so it hung down only on one side. How old was this kid? Maybe his mother consulted on his costume. Is she here? The crowd applauded his efforts as he took his place on contestant row, but I'm not sure many caught his metaphor. Cheesy continued, "The monotremes are a group of highly specialized egg-laying predatory mammals with only 5 living species, contained within 2 families. The family Ornithorhynchidae, whose godfather is the platypus, a single species in a single genus, Ornithorhynchus anatinus. The family Tachyglossidae's godfather is the echidna, aka Miss Spiny Anteater. These quill-covered egg-laying mammals contain 4 extant species of echidnas. They sing in a quartet when they get together. Welcome Donna as tonight's echidna and Julie as the ever-popular platypus." They strolled across the stage, feigning a war between themselves. Julie was trying to show off her poison spike. Pedemolans are some of the smallest members of the family Macropodidae in the genus Thylogale. Their Derrick Aboriginal name came from the word batamalian, while the Greeks called them pouch or weasel. Representing for the Pedemolan tonight is Aaron. And cheers went up as he paraded across the stage and took his spot in the line, high-fiving all the other contestants. Hailing from the kingdom of Animalia in the phylum of Chordata in the order of Diprotodontia from the superfamily Vombatoidea, put your hands together and welcome Aaron the wombat. To which Aaron took her cue and whipped up the crowd, which was now suitably supercharged like a superfamily. I'm not sure if there were neighbors within 20 kilometers of us, but even that probably wasn't far enough on that night. Sarcophilus horizii is a carnivorous marsupial in the family Dasyuridae of some distinction. Until recently, this little meat warrior was only found in Tasmania and on Walt Disney. But in an attempt to preserve the species, it's been relocated to the mainland. Is she our only carnivore following the extinction of the thylacine? Let's find out and welcome Lucky Lily, our Tasmanian devil. To which Lily put on a performance as a Tasmanian devil that made us wonder if she really was one or not. Errol was super happy that she was doing so well at the challenge, and I can't help wonder if that was because it would make Stephanie happy. The Tasmanian masked owl is a bird that needs a mask but no introduction. A member of the Titanidae clan, they're born and raised here in Tasmania. This bad boy is a demon in the night sky and may be watching you right now from behind his mask. Welcome Donald, our Tasmanian masked owl who's going to swoop down on you tonight. Now Donald was a very smart fellow and extremely nice, but Donald could be a tad clumsy. As he was parading across the stage, he tripped over his own 2 feet and launched himself headfirst into a group of girls that rallied together to throw themselves in front of him and catch him. Cheesy told me later he taught Donald that trick. Quolls from the genus Dasyurus are the second largest of the world's surviving carnivorous marsupials and still giving the devils a run for their money. The spotted-tailed quoll was widely, but sparsely, distributed on the island, but extinct on King and Flinders Islands. Being endangered, she may look a little nervous, so try to make her feel comfortable here tonight and welcome Pearl, our spotted-tailed quoll. Pearl cautiously made it across the stage to her position on contestants' row. The southern right whale is a baleen whale and only one of 3 species classified as right whales belonging to the genus Eubelina. Whalers considered right whales to be the right whale to hunt since they were slow swimmers, rather friendly, and their fat blubber layer made them so buoyant they would float when dead. How easy was that? Welcome Richard as our southern right whale. Richard, being one of the most popular candidates, swam across the stage, floating as if on a cloud. The crowd cheered him on as he continued through them, body surfing across the top. It took a great picture. The thylacine, perhaps an extinct carnivorous marsupial, was native to the Australian mainland and the islands of Tasmania. The last known live tiger was captured 90 years ago locally. Tonight, our very special guest is the Tasmanian tiger making a comeback. Rick, our thylacine, and the crowd went absolutely wild, but it was led by Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur. Cheesy had tipped them off, so they got 3 long air horns to blow into, and the uncles sent a vibration across the top of the lake that woke up every predator. Cheering went on for a full 10 minutes before things got settled down again into a dull roar. The contestants took their starting positions and the competition began. Spectators milled behind the various screens as the competitions heated up. Cheers went up every time a victory was achieved and a new set of adversaries took center stage. When the first round was finally over, Julie and Donna, our egg-laying monotremes, were eliminated and the quarter-finalist matchups were set. Again, cheers went up as individual competitions came to their final conclusions. Aaron and Aaron were eliminated along with Richard and Pearl. Richard's loss was hard felt by the team for some reason. That left Lucky Lily to take on Donald and Rick to deal with feisty Rob the handfish. With only 2 contests going on from this round, the crowds began to focus behind their favorites. Most were hoping for a Lily versus Rick super final. Errol and I were hoping for a long-shot final between Rob, who had fought back as a mere handfish, and Donald, who was surfing a high after his cheesy-fueled success on the stage. Perhaps Donald's head wasn't in it at that moment. Together, Errol and I had written most of the questions for this quiz, so we knew what to expect. There were over 400 questions relating to all types of work that Impact Labs did.
In addition, many lab questions were written by everyone relating to the work with the animals at the kennel at Halls Falls. It was a tough battle, but Lily was able to beat Donald, who failed to answer 2 questions. Cheesy put it down to nervousness. In the other battle, our handfish was battling tough and actually had the advantage. With the crowd firmly behind him, he pressed the button for his next question. 2 major groups of carboxypeptidases exist. One uses serine as an active site residue. What does the other use? Rob had 4 choices, and we knew the correct answer was B, or zinc. We waited patiently with everyone else. It was the first time all night you could hear the wind blowing off the lake through the canopy. B, zinc, he said as he clicked the B button. Correct, flashed the sign, and he moved his furthest token to Rick's home row, and our thylasin was defeated. The crowd cheered, some in disbelief, but it was nice to see the underdog win. Rick was still a winner in our eyes and was a good sportsman about going down as the favorite. The final was Lily, our Tasmanian devil, versus Rob, the helpless handfish. Just as it was in history, everyone eating the handfish to extinction. Lily didn't miss a question, and her strategy was exemplary. Even though the rules were very simple, the strategy was elegant. Just as ancient Greek games with stones like pente, the simpler the strategy, the more elegant the victory. It was like surgical precision, and the poor handfish lay at the altar beneath the screen as he feigned death upon his defeat. The crowd loved it, and Rob was not interested in jobs or money or anything else at that point in time because, as Cheesy said, he's come over to our side. The awards were presented and everyone settled around the campfire for some music and relaxing after a very busy day. Costume pieces littered the yard, and Rab and V were busy picking them up and packing them away while people unwound. Uncle Arthur was helping them, but was also harassing them in their costumes. The next day was scavenger day, and the lists went out displaying all of the organisms available for points. Each item on the list had a point value, with the entire list representing more than 100,000 points. With 5,000 Australian dollars on the line, the points were going to be important, but I'm not sure everyone was still focused on the contest. Life on Earth emerged more than 3.7 billion years ago and was now immensely diverse. We study and classify various forms of life, from prokaryotic organisms like archaea and bacteria to eukaryotic organisms such as protists, fungi, plants, and animals. The various organisms contribute to the biodiversity of our ecosystem, where they play specialized roles in our environment. Our challenge was limited to the kingdoms of plant, fungi, and animals, but that still left a lot of room for competition. Not all plants had a bounty on them, so knowing your plants, fungi, and animals was going to be important. The candidates had until 3 p.m. to hand in their phones, and then we had transport to take them back to Hobart, where most of them had to catch flights later that day. Plan B was also put into action when Travis and TMer sent out their emails. Although Travis and TMer didn't know it, they discovered the 2 dicks waiting in ambush at the GPS location for anyone who showed up to turn the thylasin in for the reward. Luckily, they could observe the dicks without giving themselves away. Eventually, Julie and Donna came down the path towards the location. They lingered on the path as if waiting to meet someone. The 2 dicks started to play audios from their phones of 2 Tasmanian devils having it out, like they were either fighting over the best piece of meat in the forest or the last piece of meat on the planet. The fight was on, and the girls didn't know where the devils were. Then the bushes started rustling, and that was all it took. Although they were biologists, devils were not their thing, and they fled to join the rest of the group in the scavenger day quest. Perhaps they thought they could win their spot that way. I don't think so.
Lily, Stephanie's younger sister, and Aaron both sent Travis emails pleading with him not to turn the images over and to let the animals continue to survive rather than be caged and perhaps autopsied. The day was slightly overcast and most candidates had had enough of a good thing and were ready to hand in their cameras in and await the trip to Hobart with many new friends they had made over the weekend. By 3:30 the place was again restored to the way it was when we arrived.
We thanked Uncle Nevin for all his assistance.
Uncle Artis planned to contact him and get his help finding a similar location on the lake for us to purchase for Impact Labs as a recruiting camp. In reality, we were planning to release thylacines all around Lake Gordon in a few years.
On the ride back to Hobart, we confirmed our plans for new employees.
Lily and the two Dicks, Richard and Rick, were hired to work at Halls Falls and were eventually shown the kennels much to their amazement and glee.
Aaron, Rob, and Pearl were offered positions at Impact Labs in Hobart.
It wasn't that we didn't trust them with the thylacines, but we needed their assistance in Hobart as our business was heating up to a fevered pace.
We thought at that time we may need to recruit additional personnel again this year.
Everyone agreed we wanted to hire intelligent people, not just educated people. Aaron, Donna, Richard, and Julie were not offered positions with our company but did receive some fine parting gifts to take home for their trouble. Cheesy had logged video footage of every procedure with the thylacines at Halls Falls from the previous experience, so each step could be checked in order to create best practices.
Could you imagine posting those videos to the internet? People wouldn't believe they were real. They would consult all of the experts who would say it's a hoax for sure. They would say that, and after all, they're the experts. It's best that way anyway.
We all agreed to wait 3 or 4 breeding cycles before using one of our male DNA strains to create male clones. Our females should be ready by the time they're 4, and we can artificially inseminate the first round and then try for natural breeding after that. Cloning is a long-term process from a human lifetime perspective, but from an Earth timeline perspective, it's just a tick. Magda made the artificial pouches with their names on them and positioned them as they would be on their mother, backward facing. Inside the pouches were nipples from bottles that were placed in holders behind the wall behind the pouch. Cheesy shortened Mathina's name to Maddie, and her pouch was located next to Amelia's as they seemed to be quite chummy.
Karma and Dharma's pouches were further down the pen that the boys had built for them inside the building. Joey's liked the comfort of the pouch, and we were in no hurry to drive them out.
A marsupial Joey is unable to regulate its own body temperature and relies on an external heat source. Benji, the last tiger, died in the Hobart Zoo because he was left out in the cold.
Our girls were not going to be cold.
Until the Joeys were well furred and old enough to leave the pouch, a pouch temperature of 30 to 32 degrees Celsius had to be constantly maintained.
The pouches Magda made could be heated within this range for the Joeys' dining and sleeping comfort.
The first few times the baby tigers left their pouches was such an event around the camp that we felt like we were on an endless cycle of celebration.
I was hoping we weren't heading for a crash.
The Joeys were beginning to spend increasing lengths of time out of their pouches and even interact with each other. Soon we would have to consider a change of diet.
Survival skills were not necessary for this group because their future was building the species right here in the kennel. The personal sacrifice of our young ladies. Hopefully we could make it worth their while.
We had heard that the male thylacine had a pouch that acted like a protective sheath, covering his reproductive organs in the thick brush. That's something we would have to verify in the future, but if you're gonna run naked, I guess that would give you a bit of freedom to let her rip. Errol pointed out, we know the thylacine was exclusively carnivorous in the past. When they were in captivity, they had a clear preference for birds about the size of chickens. Travis noted, in the wild, large ground-dwelling birds like the Tasmanian native hens may have been their best prey, since Aboriginal drawings depict them hunting a wide variety of those. It didn't really have a strong bite force, so was more suited to hollow avian bones than other denser bones.
Like your skull. T. Emmer added. We're just going to feed them a protein-mixed dog food. Well, I wasn't suggesting we throw live chickens in the cage and yell, "Chow's on," Travis said in a snippy voice.
Uncle Artis told us, I did know from my own research that during peak occupation such prey would have been bountiful on the mainland.
More likely a range of megapodes like the giant malleefowl ratites. The odd emu for Sunday dinner would be nice, because a Tasmanian emu was much smaller than its Aussie cousin.
Skeletons suggest that, when hunting, the thylacine relied on stamina rather than speed. It had surprisingly feeble jaws even though they look impressive and people think they're like salties. Animals usually take prey close to their own body size, but an adult thylacine of around 30 kilograms wasn't capable of handling prey any larger than 5 kilograms.
Thylacines probably only ate small animals like bandicoots and possums mate. Those are the favored foods of the devil and the tiger quoll. Errol added, measured thylacine bite force quotient was 166 or similar to a quoll.
In a mammal, a high bite force is associated with predators that take prey larger than themselves.
I read the same article with Uncle Artis.
Analysis of the skeletal frame and observations of the thylacine in captivity suggested the species were pursuit predators, singling out a prey item and pursuing them until the prey was exhausted. Cheesy added, yet I've heard trapper reports that the tiger was an ambush predator, or it hunted in small family groups. Of course, they gave them better military tactics than Napoleon, with the main group herding prey in the general direction of an individual who was waiting in ambush.
That's a bit much, mate, Uncle Arthur said.
Uncle Artis added, its stomach was muscular and could distend to allow the animal to eat large amounts of food at one time, probably an adaptation to compensate for long periods when hunting was unsuccessful and food was scarce. Errol noted, Sun Tzu says, fat thylacine don't catch many quolls. Uncle Artis told him, in captivity, thylacines were fed a wide variety of foods, including dead rabbits and wallabies, as well as beef, mutton, horse, and only occasionally poultry. There is one report of a captive thylacine which refused to eat dead wallaby flesh or to kill and eat a live wallaby offered to it, but ultimately it was persuaded to eat by having the smell of blood from a freshly killed wallaby put before its nose. I told them I saw a report where comparative cortical maps of the thylacine and Tasmanian devil brains were published showing the thylacine had a larger, more modularized basal ganglion due to the thylacine's predatory lifestyle. How on earth can they reach that conclusion about an animal's brain when they know squat about the human's brain? Did Alexander Pierce, Tasmania's most successful cannibal, have a more modularized basal ganglion? An analysis of thylacine mitochondrial genomes was the focus of another article that showed that the thylacine had split into distinct eastern and western populations on the mainland prior to the last glacial maximum and had low genetic diversity by the time of European arrival. Are the Tasmanian tigers from the Western Australian tiger population or the Eastern Australian tiger population, or were they here all along? We should ask Dr. Trask in Melbourne, but my money is on neither. They were on board Tasmania for the trip from Gondwana. It was necessary for Errol and me to head back to Hobart. I had 2 projects requiring the use of RT-PCR starting Monday. Real-time PCR is a nuclear-derived method to detect the presence of specific genetic material in a pathogen, including a virus. The method was modified from radioactive isotope markers to isotopic labeling with special fluorescent dyes. It's a technique that allows us to see the results almost immediately rather than at the end of the process, hence the name real-time. The method is widely used in laboratories to detect the COVID-19 virus typically. Many countries have used RT-PCR to diagnose other diseases, such as Ebola virus and Zika virus. Additional applications for this process exist at Windhaven as well as in Fanola, where the tsetse virus is a huge problem for King Mellon's people. Naturally, Errol and I work on more similar projects with each other on a day-to-day basis than we do with Cheesy due to our different backgrounds. If Cheesy wasn't so smart, he couldn't cross over and understand the issues and topics we face in our work. Errol and I both agreed that we could never master the programming and computer skills that he possesses and find room in our brains for our own stuff. What is the capacity of a brain? I guess that's flexible over time, isn't it? And relative to the individual. PCR-based techniques have been successfully used on animals like the 40,000-year-old mammoth, as well as on human DNA from Egyptian mummies to Russian Tsars and English kings like Richard III. Quantitative PCR methods estimate the amount of a given sequence present in a sample to quantitatively determine levels of gene expression. It's an established tool for DNA quantification that measures the accumulation of DNA product after each round of PCR amplification. There are two methods for simultaneous detection and quantification. The first method being the use of fluorescent dyes that are retained nonspecifically in between the double strands, while the second method involves probes that code for specific sequences and are fluorescently labeled. RT-qPCR allows for the quantification of a small quantity of RNA. Through this combined technique, mRNA is converted to cDNA, which is further quantified using qPCR. It sounds complicated, but this technique lowers the possibility of error at the endpoint of PCR, increasing chances for detection of genes associated with genetic diseases like cancer. We use RT-qPCR to measure gene regulation on occasion for a client here and there. Primers must be used to target specific sequences in the DNA of a virus, and PCR can be used for diagnostic analyses or DNA sequencing of the viral genome. It's crazy to think that everything has DNA, even a virus. How can someone not be thinking of weaponizing virus by modifying their DNA? The high sensitivity of PCR permits virus detection soon after infection and even before the onset of disease. Dick would love that idea. This science can deliver value to our clients to make our services economical. Diseases like whooping cough are caused by the bacteria Bordetella pertussis. The pertussis toxin, a protein exotoxin that binds to cell receptors by 2 dimers, reacts with different cell types such as T lymphocytes, which play a role in cell immunity. PCR is an important testing tool which can detect sequences within the gene for the pertussis toxin. Because PCR has a high sensitivity for that toxin and a rapid turnaround time, it's much more efficient than a culture which may delay diagnosis and treatment by considerable time. PCR had numerous applications supplementing traditional DNA cloning. It could extract segments for insertion into a vector from a larger genome, which may be only available in small quantities. Using a single set of vector primers, PCR can also analyze or extract fragments that have already been inserted into vectors. Some alterations to the PCR protocol can generate mutations of an inserted fragment. What kind of havoc can that wreak? Sequence-tagged sites are used as an indicator that a particular segment of a genome is present in a clone. The Human Genome Project used that application to map the cosmid clones they sequenced. A cosmid is a type of hybrid plasmid, a small, extrachromosomal DNA molecule within a cell that is physically separated from chromosomal DNA and can replicate independently. They can be found as small circular, double-stranded DNA molecules in bacteria. The cosmid contains a lambda phage cos sequence, which are 200 base pairs long and essential for packaging. In the lambda phage particle, the genome is a linear DNA molecule with 2 cos sequences at each end. After the phage injects its DNA into the bacterial host, the DNA circularizes. The 2 cohesive ends base pair and are ligated together by bacterial enzymes, forming a circle. They contain a cos end site where DNA is nicked at each strand, 12 base pair apart, by terminase. The terminase is a key component of the DNA packaging in bacteriophages and herpes viruses.
The terrace complex is comprised of a small ter subunit, which is a recognition subunit, and a large ter subunit, which is an endonuclease/translocase subunit. This causes linearization of the circular cosmid with 2 cohesive or sticky ends of 12 base pair. The DNA must be linear to fit into a phage head. The head of bacteriophage T4 is a prolate icosahedron with 1 unique portal vertex to which the phage tail is attached. I think the Klingons used the same design in one of their attack vessels at Kimdikdok. PCR can be used to study patterns of gene expression. Tissues can be analyzed at different stages to see which genes have become active, or which have been switched off. That application can also use quantitative PCR to quantify the actual levels of expression. That's part of a client project and can be run by anyone. Sometimes science is about saving money. PCR can simultaneously amplify several loci from individual sperm to enhance genetic mapping by studying chromosomal crossovers after meiosis. Rare crossover can be directly observed by analyzing thousands of individual sperms and at the same time observe unusual deletions, insertions, translocations, or inversions without having to wait for the laborious processes of fertilization, embryogenesis, and so forth. Occasional digital PCR is used for a client to measure the quantity of a target DNA sequence in a DNA sample. The DNA sample is highly diluted, so after running many PCRs in parallel, some do not receive a single molecule of the target DNA. The target DNA concentration is calculated using the proportion of negative outcomes. That's how it gets its name. Some nanoparticles can enhance the efficiency of PCR to outperform the original PCR enhancers. Single-walled and multi-walled carbon nanotubes enhance amplification of long PCR. Carbon nanopowder can improve the efficiency of repeated PCR as well as long PCR, while zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, and AgNPs can increase the PCR yield. It's clear that there's great potential for nano-PCR technology improvements and product development in our industry. I must give Mary a heads up on some of these to add to her stock portfolio. Sequencing devices are the technology of the future. They use flow cells which contain an array of tiny holes known as nanopores embedded in an electroresistant membrane. Each nanopore corresponds to an electrode connected to a channel and sensor chip, which measures the electric current flowing through the nanopore. When a molecule passes through a nanopore, the current is disrupted to produce a characteristic squiggle. The squiggle is then decoded using base calling algorithms to determine the DNA or RNA sequence in real time. When sequencing DNA or RNA with nanopores, the changes in current caused by the strand of DNA or RNA as it passes through the pore are recorded by software on all the sequencing devices. The processive movement of bases through the pore leads to a continual change in current, known as the squiggle. The software processes the squiggle into reads in real time, with each read corresponding to a single strand of DNA/RNA. The reads were written out into FAST5 files, which made up the raw data containing information on not only canonical bases but also base modifications, such as methylation. The nanopore determines the raw signal, the information contained within the squiggle.
Different nanopores contain different readers, the part of the nanopore which most heavily contributes to the blockage of current. The single nanopore had a single reader in the middle of the barrel, while the double-barreled approach had two nanopore readers spaced along its length, meaning more bases within the DNA/RNA strand contributed to the squiggle at any one time. That led to improvements in capturing signals around homopolymer regions, where multiples of the same nucleotide appeared one after the other on the DNA/RNA strand. New nanopores providing improved signal characteristics were always under consideration and could offer a huge competitive advantages for a lab such as ours. The signal stored within FAST5 files was processed by the base calling algorithms to decode the sequence of bases into FASTQ files. Bustard or Guppy, whatever the production base caller integrated into the flow device operating system was called, carried out base calling live during the run, after a run had finished, or a combination of the two. The process of inferring the base from the intensity quadruple was what was known as base calling. Ideally, the channel in which the maximum intensity occurred would be the base that was called. However, the chemical processes involved in sequencing were imperfect, leading to errors in base calling. Oxford Nanopore had a range of open-source research release base callers which were developed to implement new algorithms for improvements in accuracy, as well as alternative applications such as modified base detection. Cheesy and Marge would call these crap callers, but in all fairness to Oxford, this technology is one of Marge's specialties. The base calling algorithms currently deployed are based on neural networks. Those were loosely modeled on biological neural networks within the human brain, with connections of nodes or neurons passing data between themselves to arrive at a predicted base sequence. Crucially, just like a human brain, those neural networks had the ability to learn and improve their predictions over time. Does that sound like cheesy to anyone else but me? Oh yeah. Guppy, the Oxford version, utilized a bidirectional recurrent neural network, where information can be passed back and forth between nodes. Alternative algorithms were continuously assessed for their suitability at base calling, such as convolutional neural networks, which were typically used for image and video processing due to the connections between nodes mimicking the organization of the brain's visual cortex. The base calling algorithms learn how to determine nucleotide sequence through machine learning and were trained using data of a known sequence, which guides the algorithm to make correct predictions without human input. Once trained, they were validated with a subset of reads not included in their training data set. I know I've seen this on Star Trek somewhere. Are these guys the Binars or something? The nanopore captures the full context of the DNA/RNA passing through the nanopore. Users therefore have the opportunity for greater insight and improved analysis of their existing data by simply base calling with a newer algorithm, without the need to resequence their sample. Just be consistent. As the tool's operating system streams signal data in real time, base calling could begin even before the DNA/RNA strand had finished passing through the nanopore. Whilst Cheesy says base calling on the CPU is possible and more responsive, currently deployed base callers utilize the graphical processing units to take advantage of capacity. Oxford has their MK1C, GridION and PromethION devices all using onboard GPUs for base calling in real time, or catch-up base calling as Cheesy calls it. This is just one of the areas where our company is going to excel at both our business opportunities and our ability to impact the world for the better through DNA data collection and understanding. In the greater worldview, Ian will continue to do the amazing work of the Pendulum Group worldwide, and we will all contribute to hopefully make this a better world. I had a strange email conversation with Dr. Sue the other day that had disturbed me somewhat. Somehow the conversation came around to her relationship with Dick and their future together. She told me that they had no plans to get married until they were perhaps 65 and no longer interested in changing the world, or they had already finished changing it.
Then I guess you have no plans to have any children.
I said, and she replied, "Oh, we do plan to have children, but not until we have time to spend with them and be a family."
Dick and I have everything we need for a family of 6 children to be created whenever we decide.
Perhaps 2 at a time over 6 years, and we'll bring them up on the Salton Sea. In my entire life I've spent a total of 680 hours in the personal company of my mother and half that much with my father. They're married to their careers. I'm not even sure they've spent that much time with each other in their lives. Statistically, we're a family of 3. The Save the Tasmanian Devil program was the official response to the threat of the extinction of the Tassie devil due to devil facial tumor disease. Errol attended their meetings as often as he could, and I went with him once in a while, but this will never do more than make us feel slightly more optimistic. This week Rab and V decided to go with us. They are wildlife and ecology advocates to the extreme. Cheesy tells me when they were young they spent some time in jail for protesting the destruction of the Huon pines and the old-growth forest, as well as the hunting and trapping of thylacines.
I think we should get them involved at Lake Gordon when Uncle Artis finds us a place.
Rab and V can be trusted when it comes our girls.
Cheesy said.
What about Otto?
I asked and he said, I guess I should get Mary working on finding him some replacements.
The meetings were in Hobart, so it was usually, go to the meeting for an hour and then grab a couple pints at one of the local warehouse pubs by the river. I know Errol was feeling like he isn't doing enough for the Devils, but with the workload he was carrying, the best he could do was spend his time with Dr. Ben speculating on the high-end possible solutions that they were the only ones capable of finding and implementing. Often he told me that he believed the solution lay with the foreign infection, tripping the alarm and calling out the DNA damage squad.
We shall see. Failure is not an option.
In talking with various people within our group of friends, it's sometimes difficult to curb the enthusiasm for the huge things we were doing. Not everyone is conversant in all the various sciences and technologies that we deal with, so they have a different level of understanding and expectations of the things the Pendulum Group is doing and is in fact capable of doing. One of the common misconceptions, and I don't know who started it, was with Tesla's secret files and things we've been able to find in them. The claim was that Florin and Cheesy had created a tool that the person codenamed Ether Rod or some such name. Supposedly, the tool could manipulate a magnetic field created with rare earth magnets aligned with their fields and focused to control a number of different devices that could be attached. Cheesy can't really divulge a lot of sensitive information to people, and they respect that, but he does have fun with it sometimes. The amazing Ether Rod with its super strong Hercules lifting plate capable of lifting both your mother-in-law and last week's dirty laundry. Simply place both on the plate and send them to the local laundromat. Don't forget to include enough coins for the dryer, or your mother-in-law may start your unmentionables. I heard him tell a group in the lunchroom last week. Buy the new super sharp Ginzu cutting tool attachment for the Ether Rod. Having trouble cutting your wife's pot roast? Even if it's as tough as the soles on your grandmother's feet, the Ginzu will slice through it like butter. He told that to Mary the other day, and she had a good laugh until she realized we were having a roast for dinner.
Cheesy can always make Mary laugh.
We haven't heard much about Florin's research with the rare earth magnets until now because they've been overshadowed by such other startling discoveries. Measuring flux changes in the body is believed to be a measure of vital force stored or traveling within our body. At least that was a broad assumption Dr. Emily and Florin were working under. With 108 possible storage sites to be explored, Dr. Emily has a lot of work ahead of her, especially without the assistance of Jay these days. Jay has been spending a great deal of her time in Famala with Prince Sateo these days, and the travel back and forth takes a month on the ground in that part of the world. With the software and harmonics embedded in a ROM chip with Cheesy's operating system, the scanner can read levels of magnetic flux interference determined by the interference between the forces of the individual magnets fluctuating. That simply makes it ready for testing, but Dr. Emily at time had proof that she was measuring vital force or even what the value she was measuring meant. Vital force may be captured and stored in the body, perhaps even earned, but it must also travel from organism to organism during periods of reincarnation and therefore be airborne at some point.
So many questions.
Tesla also theorized about spreading ether from a height to create a cascade in an alluvial distribution in all directions over the lower lands. Perhaps that can assist us with some lightning on Mount Kenya and cast down enough vital force so that we can all reach samsara and meet Brahma, Shiva, and Krishna in ourself. We were all ready for a break by the time Christmas came around and had gotten into the habit of taking a 2-week shutdown at Christmas so we could all go to Halls Falls and spend time with the thylacines. Of course, there were always things that needed to be watched in the laboratory, so a core group remained over Christmas. That didn't seem to be an uncommon request with young science grads, especially if they had to travel the world to find the type of science projects that they needed to work on to advance their careers. This year it was only Magda and Uncle Artis in the car when they drove up to the camp from the airport.
Sandy was busy with Swami Virunda this year and had taken on commitments at the Tiger Sanctuary over Christmas, he told me. Magda informed me in confidence that he might be taking a few days in Serbia during the holiday season. The next to arrive was Mary with Mabel and Gordon, so Travis and TMer came out from the kennels to greet them. I've laid out the message sticks along the way announcing Magda's arrival, and we all cheered. Gordon made new clapsticks for us this year and passed them out to everyone for the bonfire that night. We helped Mary unload the massive amount of food she had brought from the car. December was a summer month in Tasmania with maximum daytime temperatures ranging from moderate at 19 degrees Celsius to warm at 23 degrees Celsius. Nighttime temperatures generally dropped to 11 degrees Celsius, so sleeping in a tent was not too difficult if your sleeping bag was of a decent quality. I do find it odd to celebrate Christmas in the warm weather because during my formative years it meant snow for a white Christmas. It was going to be a busy Christmas at Halls Falls with Lily and the two Dicks also staying over the Christmas holidays. Once Errol showed up with Stephanie and the two uncles came back from checking traps, the party really got underway. For the next few hours everybody was hovering around Amelia, Maddie, Karma, and Dharma. The arrival of Stephanie didn't go unnoticed, but was explained away with the presence of Lily. Oh, my goodness, look how big they are now. And they look so healthy. Their coats just shine and their eyes glisten. Magda said. Look at Maddie strut. They should have shiny coats, they lick them all day long like cats. If they're in a prone position, they're licking. They're like cats. Uncle Arthur told us. We're looking forward to the spring when we can participate in our first cloning. Lily said, and the Dicks had to agree with her, that it would be a life-changing event. They all seemed to be getting along with Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur. Travis and TMer had become quite close with them and they made a good working group. The thylacines had a good core group of humans pushing their pendulums in the right direction for a change. I study these 4 girls every day, and they are 4 clones from the same mother, so how can I recognize each one of them? I know them as Maddie and Karma for sure, but also Dharma and Amelia look different from one another. I think it's in the eyes. Rick explained to us, and both Lily and Richard agreed. With any DNA strain, there are phenotypes that can vary slightly from each other, and environmental influences can have an impact on their individual DNA.
Of course, they could have physical accidents and break legs and such which may eventually give them noticeable traits as they get older.
Errol said. While enjoying our morning breakfast the next day together outside the kitchen building, Magda told me about her sessions with Vesna Mandic. The family traces the Tesla flash, as they call it, back to Tesla's mother Georgina Duca Mandic and then to Nikola.
Several others in the family have claimed to have the flash over the years, but there have been no confirmed genius created in the family since Nikola, that we know of. However, Vesna Mandic may be the exception as she is the great-niece of Georgina Duca Mandic and therefore has the DNA link necessary to make it possible for you science boys, but of course you know my interest lies elsewhere.
My methods to determine whether or not she has the flash are slightly different. For the purpose of understanding what she had seen, I used hypnotism. To relax her and make her more receptive, I used a massage therapy that I learned from my friend Irene Tang many years ago. When we were young, Irene and I exchanged books with each other. China has some very different understandings of this realm we exist in than the rest of the world does.
Fingers placed in certain places can open up memories from very specific times if you know which ones to press. Once an emperor's wizard found that spot he owned the emperor.
She told me, I believe China is full of things we don't understand. But it's still undiscovered science.
I said, not willing to give in just yet, but not fully convincing myself. We explored many of the visions that she had in the months prior to my visit. They could occur during the day as easily as they could at night with no rhyme or reason to their occurrences. They only lasted an instant, but they blinded her and left her with an immense headache in her temple. For several days, when she coughed or bent down, she would get a stabbing pain in her temple as a reminder of what she had seen that brought her no value, only pain. I didn't want to induce the flashes at that point unless there was reason to. Dr. Ben prescribed new medication to help prevent the pain. They work to stop the blood vessels in her brain rebounding, which in turn causes the headaches. He wants us to have a mushroom experience with her and says Sandy will participate as well. Vesna told me she saw the vision in her mind's eye in full color and in extreme detail, but from above the earth. A circuit reflected around the earth over and over until it covered the whole planet. The earth was like a gigantic electric circuit, she said. Its electromagnetic field surrounded everything and had a natural pulsation to it which created waves of electrical energy. Radio frequency receivers or battery packs or some type of device were being used by people to harvest the waves. And I considered what she had said, and it sounded to me like this was Dr. Raza's plan, and perhaps she was just understanding it subconsciously now. Of course, physics is not my strong suit, so I had to talk to Florin on each one of these sessions. I taped them and he analyzed them from a physics perspective so that we could discuss whether or not there even was one. The first one, he said, described the magnifying transmitter, an adaptation of the Tesla coil. Instead of being designed to discharge to the earth, the magnifying transmitter created a Schumann frequency. Standing waves don't form under just any circumstances, he told her. During another flash memory, she recalled grids connected to each other and covering vast parts of the world. The grids were not for electricity or even telecommunications. She saw vehicles following or tracking them. Florin told me that in telecommunications, a repeater is an electronic device that receives a signal and retransmits it. Repeaters are used to extend transmissions so that the signal can cover longer distances or be received on the other side of an obstruction. He suggested it was an image of a repeater or distribution system for connected devices. Many of the flashes were series of formulas or equations that she had no understanding of. Her education was art history. One of the formulas that Florence says she has produced are parts of the freeze transmission formula used in telecommunications engineering to calculate the power to receive, I think.
Why isn't she seeing the next great art project or the next leap forward in design? Why did Leonardo see what he saw? Why did Mozart hear what he heard? When I go back, we must determine our next steps. Do we want to explore further and deeper into the psyche? What's the best way to do that? Magda told me, and then switched topics abruptly.
Sandy, Richard, and I were taken to visit a house in a narrow back street of Hoshiarpur one night by two fellows who promised to introduce us to astrologers who could prepare authentic Brigu charts for us. For a fee, of course. It was dusk when we finally arrived and the building was sketchy at best, but Sandy went in first behind our guide, so I followed, and Richard eventually came in when he figured it was better to stay with us than outside on his own. There at the table sat the two astrologers with what appeared to be a large set of Brigu Samhita leaves that were tied in bundles sitting on the table beside them. Rather careless for such revered items, I thought. She said. Then continued, the astrologers first compiled a graph, rather like a Western horoscope, but featuring the date of our arrival at the house. According to Hindu tradition, all consultations with the Brigu Samhita are preordained, and the moment of our arrival is the key to discover the proper leaf that indicates our life pattern and destiny. We watched with interest as he sorted through the leaves looking for the proper one, and finally, after inspection of various bundles, the correct leaf was found. Richard was shown the leaf, and the Sanskrit inscription. Being familiar with Brigu, Richard was able to translate it. A young lady has come from a far-off land across a vast amount of water. She travels with a pundit and a swami. We looked at each other, and Richard pointed out pundit means scholar, or could also mean priest or religious person. Sandy is obviously our swami, but... Magda went on, the reading continued. The young lady is here to study Dharma and meet with holy men and saints. Other personal details were also given. When Richard asked if he could copy the leaf, he was told he could have it. The astrologer told us, it replenishes itself. We do nothing, there is no need to. The astral records manifest physically at the appropriate time and place. That was the Brigu Samhita. Dozens of people claim their names are in it, and very specific details of their lives were revealed. It's like dozens of extraterrestrial sightings. There is so much more to this than Richard and I understand at this point. We found out later several groups use this as a way to extract funds from travelers, but there is sometimes an original behind the fakes. The next day, I received some documents Florence shipped to me from Moldavia with regards to the Immortal Project and the wolves found around Castle Seltradat. Serge, Anastasia, and the kids. They were rescued by General Anapov from the Soviet Union when it fell. Now that Magda was joined with Gorby, I thought I would like to know something more about the process they went through to make them immortal. If Magda goes the next step with Gobi and Sir Malcolm's formula, they'll be exchanging blood, which may have an impact on Magda. Perhaps Gorby went through a process to extend his life that could impact hers. Every present-day cell can be traced back in unbroken lineage for over 3 billion years to the origin of life. It's not that cells are immortal, but multi-generational cell lineages are created. The immortality of a cell lineage depends on the maintenance of cell division potential, which may be lost in any particular lineage due to cell damage, terminal differentiation in nerve cells, or programmed cell death during development. Maintenance of cell division potential over successive generations depends on the avoidance and the accurate repair of cellular damage, particularly DNA damage. In sexual organisms, continuity of the germline depends on the effectiveness of processes for avoiding DNA damage and repairing those DNA damages that do occur. Sexual processes in eukaryotes, as well as in prokaryotes, provide an opportunity for effective repair of DNA damages in the germline by homologous recombination. A protein found inside the mole rat's RNA gives its cellular protein factories extreme precision, which means their cells are less prone to errors as they get older, making them far less susceptible to age-related diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. No misfolded proteins, I suppose, but that hardly seems like the key to immortality. I had to put the documents away for another time, but I was intrigued. We gathered together our crew at Halls Falls prior to our next cloning session. Our girls, Amelia, Maddie, Karma and Dharma, were a year old and not yet old enough to become surrogate moms. 4 mama devils were used, with 4 embryos. We had planned to use 8 embryos, but reconsidered it and thought it was too much of a burden. Uncle Artis was looking to see if he could recruit a few more mama devils for us to use as breeding stock, but for this round we decided to settle on 4. Lily, Richard, and Rick were excited to be part of the event and worked closely with Errol to perform the inseminations. Travis and TMer knew exactly what had been done and also had additional work on the traps with another group of thylacines seen in the area recently. The larger DNA base they can create, the better chance the thylacine population will have to survive the long term.
It's January now, so gestation should take a month, pouch life another 4 months, will take us to the end of June.
That should be just about the time our guests arrive for the summer. If we locate a couple more mama devils, we can give Dr. Ben and Dr. Sue the opportunity to create their own. I suggested. Hopefully we'll have 6 or 8 new beautiful girls to show off.
Magda said. When Dr. Ben and Dr. Sue arrive, the thylacines will be denning in an artificial cave or someplace Travis and TMer make for them.
Wait until Dr. Ben sees the girls he's already responsible for creating.
He'll be blown away.
By the time Friday of that week came around, it was time for me to address my PhD, and Mary had me primed to deliver transcriptional regulation in Drosophila melanogaster testes to dazzle and wow the board. I can't say that was my life's work, and to be honest, I know less about that than I do about 1,000 other things that interest me.
That was simply a means to an end. The process of sperm production in animals requires activation of many genes that aren't used in other tissues.
At least 10% of the protein coding genes in both the human and flight genomes are expressed exclusively in the testis.
Think about that for a moment.
In our lab, we investigated the transcriptional controls that generate this testis. Drosophila melanogaster starred in my presentation, and I kept thinking he sounds like a character from one of Sandy's fireside stories. Mutant alleles, localized protein to chromatin in the male germline, gene expression, and so much more, I had them dazzled. CRISPR mutagenesis was used to generate knockout alleles of this gene. We were initially aiming to determine how the phenotype compared to known pathway components, but mutants appeared. Further analysis revealed how the protein interacted with and modulated the function of the core complex. The gene had recently evolved, and a cross-species comparison revealed how new components can integrate into established regulatory modules.
Thank you, Dr. Me, PhD.
Errol was up next, and after Mary finished brushing him off, whipping the non-existent dandruff from his shoulder and messing up his already neat hair, he was ready to deliver. Nucleic acid hybridization reactions provide a sensitive way of detecting specific nucleotide sequences.
Tests of gene expression were initially performed with 1 DNA probe at a time.
DNA microarrays now allow the simultaneous monitoring of hundreds or thousands of genes at a time.
Hybridization methods are in wide use in cell biology.
When an aqueous solution of DNA is heated at 100 degrees Celsius or exposed to a very high pH, the complementary base pairs that normally hold the two strands of the double helix together are disrupted, and the double helix rapidly dissociates into two single strands. DNA denaturation was for many years thought to be irreversible, unlike the vasectomy. It was discovered that complementary single strands of DNA readily reform double helices by a process called hybridization if they're kept for a prolonged period at 65 degrees Celsius. Similar hybridization reactions occur between any two single-stranded nucleic acid chains such as DNA to DNA, RNA to RNA, or RNA to DNA. Take your choice provided they have complementary nucleotide sequences. These specific hybridization reactions were widely used to detect and characterize specific nucleotide sequences in both RNA and DNA molecules. Single-stranded DNA molecules used to detect complementary sequences are probes. They carry radioactive or chemical markers to facilitate their detection and can be anywhere from 15 to thousands of nucleotides long. Cheesy whispered in Mary's ear, "The boy is making seeker missiles, my dear." That's his father's side coming through. And she slapped him on the arm. Hybridization reactions using DNA probes are so sensitive and selective that they can detect complementary sequences present at a concentration as low as 1 molecule per cell. It's possible to determine how many copies of any DNA sequence are present in a particular DNA sample. The corollary is true: search for related but non-identical genes as well. To find a gene of interest in an organism whose genome has not yet been sequenced, a portion of a known gene can be used as a probe. Why does this sound so weaponizable to me? I could feel a shudder through the bench from Mary 3 meters away when Errol finished, and we instinctively knew he was Dr. Errol Ashton, Ph.D. Failure truly is not an option once success is achieved. Cheesy, Errol and I were excited for this next step in our business adventure. I shouldn't call it that because it pissed Errol off. It's not just the adventure of some spoiled rich kids, but a serious business, and failure is not an option. Impact Labs was now going to create its own flow device with base calling software and enter the market against Oxford Nanopore. We had to come up with catchy name like Guppy or Bustard, our competitors. Our flow device needed a catchy operating system name too. Don't forget a name for the handheld device itself. I said. Florin is sending us one of his people to design the device for us and package it. Who's he sending? Cheesy asked, and I replied, Nevin Seltrodat. Cheesy said he didn't know him, but he was one of Uncle Sandu's many nephews. The Jacks will be getting a call for the scoop. The tool we were creating was the ideal tool for us because it took into consideration all of our strengths and could have a huge impact on the future going forward, which the future tends to do. Our ability to read and sequence DNA, then manipulate it with the same tool, is mind-boggling. If that same tool could implement it, you'd have a grand slam, as Dick's granddad would call it. Marjolaine Creek was about to earn the praise that Cheesy had bestowed upon her on arrival. I give her top marks in software design and system development. Currently, thousands of genomes have been wholly or partially sequenced, so making sense of all that data is going to take a new approach from what people today consider logic. And that came from Cheesy, so it meant something more than if it came from someone I didn't respect on the topic. Marjolaine and her husband Otto Nattun were settled into Hobart, where his store and warehouse were located, but we knew Otto was about to lose two very fine employees. Cheesy was going to look for an opportunity to bring her into our thylasin plans when he was confident of her position and what you would say about Otto. Cheesy said we would be able to create our own new nanopores with better signal characteristics. At that time they had expanded to 2, but that was just the beginning. The signal stored within Oxford FAST5 files was processed by base calling algorithms to decode the sequence of bases into FASTQ files. For the time being, that format would do as it retained the data already captured even if it was wrong and needs to be reinterpreted. The base calling algorithms currently deployed were based on neural networks. Neural networks within the human brain, connections to nodes and neurons passing data between themselves to arrive at a predicted base sequence. Like a human brain, the neural networks learn and improve their predictions over time. Does that sound like cheesy to anyone else but me? Oh yeah. Duppy, the Oxford version utilized a bidirectional recurrent neural network where information passed back and forth between nodes. Alternative algorithms were continuously assessed for their suitability at base calling, such as convolutional neural networks that were typically used for image and video processing due to the connections between nodes mimicking the organization of the brain's visual cortex. Base calling algorithms learn to determine nucleotide sequences through machine learning and are trained by the guiding algorithm. Correct. Incorrect. Learn. Again. Correct predictions without human input. Once trained, they are validated with a subset of reads not included in the training data set. I know I've seen that on Star Trek. Are those binars or something? The nanopore captures the full context of the DNA/RNA passing through the nanopore. Users have greater insight and improved analysis of their existing data by simply base calling with a newer algorithm. No need to resequence their sample. As the tool's operating system streams signal data in real time, base calling can begin even before the DNA/RNA strand has finished passing through the nanopore. Whilst Cheesy says base calling on the CPU is possible and more responsive, deployment of the base callers to utilize the graphical processing units takes advantage of larger capacity and extended operations to be integrated in. Oxford has their MK1C, GridION and PromethiON devices all using onboard GPUs for base calling in real time, or catch-up base calling as Cheesy calls it. That weekend people were heading in from everywhere because the end of June was finally upon us and the phone calls were coming in. Since it was our turn to answer this year, Uncle Artis was taking charge of transportation for us. The airport shuffle was on and we were all heading to Halls Falls because that was where we had the most space to house everyone coming. Not to mention our four ladies, Amelia, Maddie, Dharma, and Karma were a huge draw. Magda, Cheesy, Errol and I were already at the falls, as was Mary. We were expecting Dr. Sue and Dr. Ben, who could only stay for 2 weeks and then had to head back to Windhaven. Dick was also due at the same time for at least 1 week, and Cheesy was prepared with all kinds of one-liners for the 3 Dicks. Especially the big one. Ian, whom a lot of us had not seen in a while, at least since Jay had announced her wedding to Prince Sateo, was due to arrive with Rick and Sandy from India. Lorenzo's purpose on this trip was to go to Lake Gordon with us and create the tracking software, but he begged Cheesy to come to Halls Falls to see the thylacines. That was small enough reward for all the great work Lorenzo had done on behalf of the animals at Windhaven and in the fight against the Black Bee at that time. Sandy and Ian arrived in Uncle Arthur's car and Rick, back from China, was in the back seat. Sandy needed a bit of sophisticated talk on his way out here. Uncle Arthur said with regard to Sandy being in his car and not with Uncle Artis. In a couple of weeks, we'll carry on to Lake Gordon, where Uncle Artis purchased a piece of property and Stephanie's Uncle Nevin was getting it ready for us to use this summer. We plan to build kennels and release most of our thylacines in that area of Tasmania, but that would be saved for a future time. Thousands of kilometers of remote shoreline existed around Lake Gordon. What a great place for a penal colony. Magda was shocked to see Rick arrive and said, "Where is Darla and Krista?"
Ian had not informed anyone that they were back temporarily from China and would be heading back in about 6 weeks. Okay, make your arrangements and then I will bring you up to date before you leave. After a fantastic Tassie-style barbecue by Uncle Arthur and Uncle Artis, we were treated to baked delicacies from the kitchens of Mary and Mabel. Gordon was explaining the clapping stick to Dr. Sue and Dr. Ben. Errol and Stephanie were getting the fire ready with the help of Lily and the 2 Dicks. Just at that moment, a military vehicle pulled into the driveway and out stepped Colonel Dick Wadden III. Sandy ran out to meet him and give him a hug, as did Dr. Sue. I don't know who looked funnier. For the next hour there was more backslapping and high-fiving than at the last 3 Euro Cup victories. Obviously Dick was happy to see everyone and everyone was happy to see Dick. Once Cheesy got the 3 Dicks wound up, there was nothing but backslapping and high-fiving until bandages had to be handed out. Especially to the smaller Dicks. Ian, Rick, Cheesy, Magda and I stepped aside for a quiet discussion. Rick informed us, Darla and Krista and I are only back for a month to 6 weeks to recuperate and restock our supplies. I'm meeting with Swami Varana before I go back to restock my mycelium and to have a couple of sessions with the mushrooms. Destiny is still in China with the circus, but I'm going to take some mushrooms back with me to give her a treatment and a major connection with the mycelium. Both Darla and Krista are going to have a mushroom session in India before we return to China this time. We must be our strongest to challenge this foe, my friends. She's indeed mighty, as we've seen with our own eyes. As you're probably aware, we're working with Irene Tang and the Khan family circus. Her eldest brother is known as Razor Tang, although his real name was Abdul. I came to find out why they called him Razor. The Tang's focus is on a linear evolution of their art towards the extreme refinement of the skill involved to a mystical level. They always strive for an elusive perfection. Why is perfection elusive? Simply because we can't recognize it. Razor took us into an area he called Changhong, where we were supposed to meet our guide. It was late on the night we found him, and Darla, Krista and Thief were with Irene, Razor, and me for what turned out to be a 4-day journey. The Kulunlan River meanders through this area, and we had to follow it without being seen. We were off the beaten path and traveling by car. Small towns popped up everywhere, it seemed. The river was never-ending as we traveled for days following its path and finally ending in a place known to the locals as Adunkulusumu. It wasn't on any map that we could find. We weren't exactly in any type of town center, but more of a rural area, and our guide or host set up accommodations for us in the form of a couple of yurts. Yurts are circular tents which he had stored in the back of his vehicle. That's where we strategized our plan for the next night. Krista had Thief fly out during the day, but he had to be stealthy because there were raptors in the area that could have him for breakfast. She had to fly him mostly at night, but Thief could be tricky with his own stealth moves and often put the hurt on the raptor, that though he had him in his claws. Thief got us to a location that had a number of barns and large fenced-in yards. It was obviously a farm of some type, but we couldn't see any livestock. We approached it just around midnight, but it was still extremely bright out in that part of the world, almost like day, so you might think it was only about 8 in the evening. A series of barns lay on either side of a pasture. The fence line provided us a hiding place, concealing us from the barn area. Eventually, the doors of the barn were slid open, and we could see the silhouette of elephants against the light shining through the barn. Rick paused and took a sip from the beverage that he was holding. There are no elephants in that part of the country, naturally, are there? Magda asked. No, these were not ordinary elephants either. Their tusks were extreme. They hung down to the ground, and the elephant had to lift his head and move the tusks before he could move his body into position behind it. Both Darla and Krista wanted to rush out and attack their handlers, and I held them back. That would have just tipped them off to the fact that we knew. The proper move was to take this knowledge and restructure our approach. This was so much bigger than we knew before that night. We didn't see them, but our guide told us she had many rhinoceros on her farms elsewhere. Tigers, bears, and many smaller ones in sheds with racks that reach 20 meters in the air. Cloning like that takes time. You don't clone a 30-year-old elephant in a day. You clone a baby elephant and grow it for 30 years. And how can you grow tusks that large without genetic interference? I said and put my hands in the air and then on my head. Are we too late? Are we that far behind? Lorenzo was given access to some very special files in the Celtradat archives to research Beatrice Chan and any clan or dynasty ties she may have had in the past. There were documents cross-referencing the Khan Circus from all parts of China going back almost 400 years. Since a time in the early 1700s when the Chinese first criminalized opium, the Celtradat and Khan Circus have found the need to exchange people, animals, and baggage at or near border crossings quite often apparently. Amazing items changed hands if only part of what's in the diary can still be found in that dungeon of a basement. One such item should be an original copy of Chao Shuiqin's wonderful masterpiece, Dream of the Red Chamber, published sometime before 1800. It was a blend of realism and romance, psychological motivation and fate, daily life and supernatural occurrences according to reviewers of the time, and one of 4 great books of China. The Jia family was truly a family in Chinese eyes, composed of 2 main branches, with lots of kin and kith. Is that family in China? There was a lot more information in the diary, about the supernatural especially, but that's for another day. I'll have to skip past the First Opium War, he said, flipping through a notepad he had pulled from his pocket. A treaty where Russia received some land north of the Amur River. The Second Opium War, the Dungan Revolt. This one may be interesting because there were several high-ranking officials from the Chan clan. An uprising began among the Hui people living on the west bank of the Yellow River. I have a friend checking into that further. He flicked his book against his sleeve and then said, "Do you think you know of the worst disaster that ever occurred to humans on this planet?" We all looked at each other, and then Errol said, "We've probably heard of it, but it could be one of many things." The Yellow River flood killed 2 million people and made an additional 2 million homeless. Have you heard about it? No. That's a lot of lives to go unnoticed. I thought, can things go on in China that we never know about? Of course, how naive could I be? It can be a completely different world there, and perhaps even a different realm, and we would never know. Beatrice Chan's world can be 100 years in the future from ours, and not the 100 years behind that the West assumes they are or that they want to think they are. The other natural disaster for the Chinese people was Mao Zedong's speech in Yan'an entitled Reform and Learning, the Party and Literature, establishing the Yan'an rectification movement and beginning an ideological purge which would claim some 10,000 lives. What a day! Her family roots originate in the Bayanhar Mountains in Qinghai province of western China, near the source of the Yellow River. That's the source of her power and runs like a vein through China to the sea to let her blood flow into the ocean and eventually the world. The Yellow River's basin was the birthplace of ancient China, and over many centuries and dynasties it's been one of the most prosperous. At that time, connections to the Yellow River meant Beatrice Chan and Chan Pharmaceuticals, which in China meant ancient Chinese cures in conjunction with modern no-holds-barred modern pharmaceuticals. Her creative artist is a fellow by the name of Dr. Simon Ping when it comes to genetics. Lorenzo told us. Why do Chinese doctors' names always sound so flashy? Dr. Simon Ping. Come on, mate. Errol asked. Dr. Errol Ashton.
Dr. Simon is a very flashy fellow as well.
It's important to flaunt your wealth in China.
That's where he gets his credibility.
Or so I'm told.
I'll be researching him as well as some of Ms. Chan's holdings on the Yellow River in cities like Lanzhou, Yinchuan, Xinzhou, and Danying. The other Bs are also on our radar and any associates that may be involved in this nasty business. Obviously, the river is a connection to them all.
Anything my people find, will get to you and the girls in the field as soon as we can, Rick. Ian's working on improving communications with one of the Celtradats from the circus. Lorenzo told us.
Rick replied, "Thank you, Lorenzo. I'm new to all of this skullduggery myself. I think at this point we'll be returning to the Lake Huluan area where her roots are and see what we can find at the source." Magda thanked him as well, and we all said our goodbyes to Magda as Uncle Artis took her to the airport and Uncle Arthur went along for the ride. The rest of us rejoined the others around the fire where Sandy was about to give us an update on the Salton Sea.
Salton Sea updates. Well, let's go around the bay.
You probably want to know about your own houses, but Uncle Sandu has most likely kept you up to date on that. What I can tell you is that Stephanie and I have been taking the liberty, in your absence, to begin planting around our property, and we've got some dandy cacti coming up all over the place.
My house is completely done, of course, and I'm living in it.
I'm doing my meditation into the sun and sea every morning, then strolling down to the warehouse to meet Stephanie. She has begun to add corals now that the water level is rising and the salinity and temperature is dropping. In our coral symbiosis, the energy coming from all algae symbionts becomes food for the corals, as you probably know. The algae also provides the colors you see when you look at reefs, because corals themselves are colorless. High temperature or high salinity can kill the algae inside, and they become bleached.
No color.
Then Errol added,
Stephanie told me the Red Sea corals are more resistant to bleaching in summer temperatures.
Being able to withstand high salinity is one of the secret powers of the Red Sea corals.
But they aren't corals because the organism inside isn't an algae but an aiptasia. Sandy confirmed what he said, it's the same symbiosis with algae and they're closely related.
They're easily kept in the laboratory, whereas corals needed a lot of care, so it's good to have them in the water now and just a few trial corals in the tanks.
I have been doing a fair bit of diving in our area.
We have a boat and there is a public marina on the southeast side of the sea, so we can easily walk from the aquarium to the boat if we're transporting something or retrieving it and bringing it back to the warehouse, which we have had to do on several occasions. Our Gorgonia coral is already spectacular. We have a Venus fan which will be ideal for divers to take pictures in front of. It can reach 1.5 meters in height eventually, and we have dozens of them in the garden. The skeleton is made of calcite and flattened branches run along the flat part of the fan to hold its shape. You should see our fungia and how they vary in color from white to pink, blue, purple, or yellow, and it's generally round or oval in shape to resemble a fan mushroom, but they're everywhere and can be stunning in the right light.
Stephanie has done an amazing job.
All the buildings are building up a patina that makes them look old already, and there are tons of small fish living around the structures.
The reef looks really healthy when you're down below.
Then Sandy moved his tour further down the Salton Sea to Bombay Beach, or the site of the new Celtradat casino. They finally have the ground floor finished for the casino now. For the last 1.5 years, they've been building a sacsayhuama-like wall which will be the foundation or base for the pyramid on the Salton Sea.
People will be walking by it to get to the entrance. It'll be imposing.
To build the wall, they used the technology that Florin and Cheesy designed with the Tesla patents on the P-waves used to soften igneous rock, making it malleable enough to work.
Sacsayhuaman has 3 massive terrace walls with the largest stones used in any building in the Americas. Precision cutting and fitting is unmatched in the Americas if you consider any of the work done to be cutting, but I think it's clear now that what Florin and Cheesy have created is more likely the way things were done back in the day. P-waves passing through moves the material it's passing through forward, then back, along the same path that the wave's traveling. P-waves travel through solids, liquids, and gases. S-waves move material they travel through from side to side or up and down compared to the direction the wave is traveling. Different than the P-wave. Transverse waves. Only transmitted through solid materials. Sonic waves, vibrations, waveguides, and some type of rocks whipped together with cheesy software, I think. The stones are so closely placed together that a sheet of paper can't fit between many of them. Precision fit, rounded corners, and a variety of interlocking shapes with many in the form of animals. Those can't be explained by science, so they didn't bother to try. The way the walls lean inward helps survive devastating earthquakes in the area. Not that Uncle Sandu was expecting earthquakes or tsunamis on the Salton Sea, but his foundation would be able to withstand it if there were. At Sacsayhuaman, the longest of the 3 walls is about 400 meters long, 6 meters tall, and over 6,000 cubic meters in volume. Estimates for the weight of the largest andesite block reach almost 200 tons. Uncle Sandu was using stone of less density, but I'm not sure what that was. It's formidable because the cranes needed to be massive to put them in place. I don't think the largest ones are quite as big, but on average they have almost as much tonnage, I was told. I expect to see the pyramid begin to rise shortly. They've also started on the circus building, which will be across the street and border the berm. Sandy told us. Carl told me it was not technically a casino and could not be labeled as a casino. A casino was defined by certain types of games such as table games, which were not in play at the Celtrottet Entertainment Facility and Circus. At least not with a live dealer. The ADW was set up to work from terminals or any type of slot game could be played and any sporting event could be wagered on from horses to hockey. Casino-style games were sort of vague. Sandy continued. Lots of other businesses are opening up in the whole section over there known as Bombay Beach. Bars, clubs, restaurants, and shops based on the Pyramid of the Sun design and located on the Avenue of the Dead. A couple hotels and of course the big facade for civic presentations is right there with the massive stairway leading up the berm to the podium and stage. The berm is on level with the Celtrottet mezzanine, so it makes a terrific observation point for any civic presentation. The Celtrottet Casino will be the casino on the Avenue of the Palms and Fifth Avenue or the Pyramid on the Salton Sea Casino. Now if you jump in my virtual car, we'll head down the Grapefruit Highway towards Palm Springs and Palm Desert. On your left, looking towards the sea, you will see 2 back-to-back 72-hole golf courses that you can play in one day. Left on the morning, right on the afternoon. If you live in one of the townhouses on the right, you can just drive your golf cart over. There are overpasses, so you don't even need to cross Grapefruit Highway. The marsh has a bit of wildlife now, and as we turn left to go around the sea, we pass through the reserve, which is pretty much just hidden from the roadside as you drive past it and head towards the old yacht club and casino. No idea what they're doing at the reservation, if anything. The yacht club was not totally saved by the berm as we suspected, and they had to cut it in half to get the berm in, but now there's plenty of room behind it to expand anyway. They can't get a yacht club inside the sea because it's all public access only with no private yacht clubs. Then Salton City itself is booming.
I think it's probably full because the traffic around there is crazy and everything seems to be bustling. It's best to just pass through there and stop to look at where the new canal is dumping all this lovely seawater into the Salton Sea and bringing in so much life. That's pretty much the tour because this area is straight across the sea from our properties," he said and sat back in his chair. Everyone else began chattering about what he had just told us.
Question period went on for an hour or more. The next morning, after our yoga, we had a conference call with Mary from Hobart.
She had met with our marketing people on the Impact Labs rebranding and has some new information for us. Our new handheld flow device is going to be called the Imp to compete against Oxford's Minion.
I think ours sounds so much smarter and it probably will be with cheesy software. Cheesy said, "I can see the headlines now, Imp kicks shit out of Minion," and we laughed.
Fairies, goblins, gremlins, cherubs, and cupids all seeking out samples of your DNA to sequence. The operating system that controlled the capture, nanopore algorithm and base calling will be known as Neuron. The base unit that the base calling will be sending the captures to for further processing will be known as basal, short for basal ganglia. This iteration of Impact Labs is looking like they think they're pretty smart. I hope they can live up to their advanced billing. For the next several weeks we spent time around Halls Falls with Dr. Sue and Dr. Ben. Being able to create their own clones of what was supposedly an extinct animal was a bucket list item for Dr. Sue.
Once Uncle Artis located 2 additional devil mamas, it was all systems go.
That made 6 that we had to attend to, which was our maximum capacity in the kennel at the moment.
Not that Travis and TMer wouldn't stay up all night adding anything that was needed.
While we were sitting around the bonfire that evening, Ian asked Sandy if he had any Hindu stories suitable for this evening, to which she replied, "This world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for a single person's greed."
A quote taken from Mahatma Gandhi.
Yudhishthira, our friend from the Mahabharata, told us anger is an enemy that is difficult to conquer, but greed is an endless sickness. As well, from that same great book, just as the horns of a cattle grow with age, so does the greed of humans as they become richer. He stopped and paused for a moment. Do you wonder why I talk of greed? We're coming to a point in this world's evolution when humans will be given a huge opportunity for everyone to profit. Let's understand greed before that time comes. The Laughter of Drupadi is a story that takes place after the war, when the victorious Pandavas approached Bhishma, who was lying on a bed of arrows just lounging. They were seeking his advice on politics, spirituality, dharma, and such matters. While they were listening to his instructive words, a thought suddenly crossed Drupadi's mind, and she started laughing loudly. Everyone got distracted and thought that it was quite rude of her to start laughing so loudly when they were all listening intently. After all, it was serious advice on dharma from Bhishma, a respected and elderly person. Bhishma understood that Drupadi must have had an important reason for laughing. When asked by him, she said, "I laughed because I thought it was funny that you should teach dharma to Pandavas, who are very virtuous and dutiful themselves.
You never taught dharma to the evil Duryodhana when he tried to kill the Pandavas.
You never tried to teach dharma to Duryodhana when he cheated in the game of dice and snatched our kingdom, forcing us to live in the forest.
You never taught the Kauravas about dharma when they tried to disrobe me in front of everyone.
It's hypocritical now to teach the meaning of dharma and moksha to my husbands." The Pandavas were aghast that their wife should be so impertinent as to question the character of their great-grandfather, but he said, "Drupadi has indeed raised the correct doubts about my wrong behavior.
And the answer to her question will be especially relevant in the Kali Yuga, when dharma will decline and adharma will become stronger.
The bull will only have one leg to stand on."
Shizi noted. I know people with less. Uncle Arthur quipped. I think he was referring to a feud he was having with his best friend Desmond. Drupadi is correct in alleging that I did not stop Duryodhana from doing evil when I indeed should have. This is because I was working for him, he was my king, and I was dependent on him for my livelihood. Therefore, I could never gather the courage to stop him from treading the path of Adharma. But when Arjuna's arrows hit me and drained my blood, bringing me too close to death, all the food and luxuries I had enjoyed under Duryodhana became irrelevant, and I have since realized my folly. I shall only instruct about Dharma so people may learn from my example and never side with Adharma for the sake of protecting livelihood. Life is choices, and as far as possible, we should try to disassociate ourselves from dependence on Adharma sources for our livelihood. That's not always possible for all people. Being independently wealthy gives you that freedom. We shall see where the new year takes us. We took a few hikes in the forest, and I showed Dr. Sue all of the sights she had heard about from Tasmania but not seen. Dr. Ben and Sandy had visited Tasmania several times prior to this visit, but they said it was a special place for them. Sandy said it felt old to him just as India did. Dr. Ben did a nighttime hike to show us some ghost mushrooms he found and set up in a display for us. So many different colors, it was a field of wildflowers to the eyes. Today was the day Dr. Sue and Dr. Ben had to leave to return to Africa, and Rick was due to meet Darla and Krista in India in a few days. It was a sad day because we were going to miss them all. I thought it was too bad that we couldn't all work at the same facility, but then we might not get as much work done enjoying life that much. Uncle Artis was taking them to the airport, and when he was there he'll be picking up Stephanie, who was going to join us at Lake Gordon for a few weeks. I'm not sure whether it was Sandy or Errol's idea, but either way they're both giving Uncle Artis instructions. Mary was taking Mabel and Gordon back to Hobart and then returning to open up the offices while the rest of us went off to Lake Gordon. Uncle Arthur, Travis and T. Emmer were taking Ian, Sandy, and Lorenzo to Lake Gordon, while Cheesy and I were stopping off quickly at the lab in Hobart before continuing to Lake Gordon. Errol took Stephanie for a quick visit to her uncle before continuing on to our Impact Lodge on Lake Gordon, as we were beginning to call it. There was some equipment we needed to pick that had been delivered to the lab while we were at Halls Falls. That left Lily and the two Dicks run Halls Falls and take care of Amelia, Maddie, Dharma, and Karma, as well as the 6 new Joeys just out of the womb. That was a big burden, but they assured us they were up to the task. The property that Uncle Artis purchased for us was about 100 kilometers north of Stephanie's Uncle Nevin's property. Mary made a deal with Otto to free up Robert and Viella to come and work at Impact Lodge. Uncle Nevin was going to replace Robert and do Otto's deliveries for him, as well as take him out on rural selling trips. 2 lovely young ladies from the Save the Tasmanian Devil movement needed jobs, so Mary arranged for them to share the retail hours, and Otto was quite happy with that arrangement. Uncle Arthur was totally enamored with Rab and V, to the point where it is almost embarrassing. He'd recently taken a trip to the Lake Gordon property to help artists construct some outbuildings and was filling me in on what it looked like when he was there. Artists built Rab and V and a nice little single-room cabin with its own facilities. I call it the Hutch. It has a porch on the front that faces the sunset, and V placed 2 rocking chairs on it. Every night I saw them sitting in those chairs rocking away to beat the band, smoking on their pipes, and watching the sunset. I asked, smoking their pipes, to which she replied, they grow the finest Tasmanian sativa on the island. Robert calls it Rabmanian clover. And he started laughing and slapping his leg. Uncle Arthur was over 2 meters tall, whereas Rab was barely 1.5 meters and V appropriately shorter. I must admit, when I see the 3 of them together, it strikes my funny bone, but I muster up considerably more decorum than Uncle Arthur. Perhaps he's having a Rabmanian contact high.
Sheezy and I drove to Lake Gordon together, and of course, Sheezy had to drive, so that left me on navigation and conversation.
How many critters do you think have become extinct in Australia, including Tasmania, since the last ice advance about 11,000 years ago? Sheezy said, simple answer. Too many.
I told him, 32 mammal species, of which 7 were from Tasmania.
10 extinct bird species, of which 9 were from Tasmania.
2 reptile species, 1 from each, and 5 amphibian species, all from the mainland. I eventually got a better flow going, but only because I posed DNA questions after that. Finally, we arrived at Lake Gordon, and the property was very similar to Stephanie's uncle's place. The actual land we purchased was priced on shorefront, so that was limited to about 400 meters, but the property extended back several kilometers. We pulled out the topographical maps and looked over the area. This would be a very remote place to get bitten by a tiger snake, so I decided to be extra careful. Actually, just a big chicken, according to Errol. There are places here where no person has ever placed a foot, Uncle Artis stated. And nobody is likely ever to either, Uncle Arthur added. It was indeed the perfect place to go unnoticed for our ladies. Sheezy gave Robert 20 remote cameras to place around Lake Gordon to see if there were any existing thylacine activity in the area. Those cameras took pictures and sent them to us by email. With the lake at its lowest level in years, most of the shoreline was exposed for a fair distance, so cameras had an excellent long view of animals traveling down to the water for any reason. Let's get a couple of canoes and find some good spots for these mates, Robert said, and proceeded to load the boats with our equipment. He decided to team up with Ian and let Errol team up with me. Errol will keep you safe from Snake's mate, and I'll look out for the Englishman, he said, and gave Errol an impish wink. Over the next couple weeks, we teamed up on a regular basis and planted 4 or 5 each day we were out. When Robert found an appropriate spot, we would leave the boats and travel to an elevation that would give us a bird's-eye view over several kilometers of beach along the edge of extremely dense forest. The Pleiades Basin was our first target on day 1, while on different days we went further out to Halley Basin and then Pierce Basin. I wondered if it was named after Alexander Pierce. Several additional days were spent covering the Calder Reach as extensively as we could with the cameras Cheesy gave us. Although this was originally a cottage property intended for a family, Uncle Artis added several bunk-style buildings to house enough people for our business requirements. The kennels would come later, but originally it was a research location. Lorenzo and Cheesy had a lot of work to do for the next couple of weeks, which left Ian, Sandy, Errol, Ian, Stephanie, and I up to our own devices. This gave me a wonderful chance to catch with Ian while Errol was preoccupied. We'd not been able to spend a great deal of time together over the last few years, but continued to keep in close touch through email and phone conversations, but neither of those are close enough for the most intimate of topics. I asked Ian, what do you think about living in Africa full-time now that you've been there for some time? It's a dangerous life, isn't it? Yes. But when you're there you don't really think of it like that. Sure, sitting in our dorm room at school we couldn't imagine it, but I have a different perspective now. These people endure so much just to make each day matter. When I was young and went on walks with Father, I was aware of the men he had traveling on either side of the path at a discreet distance to make sure none of the large African killers could attack his little princesses, including Richard. We stayed on the path, but there were still scorpions and death adders to be wary of. I saw a man with his 2 daughters about 100 meters off the path, and they were all carrying buckets. I asked him, "What are they doing?" and my father replied, they must travel to the river to fetch water in their buckets each day and bring it back to the village for the people to drink. One day on our walk, I noticed the man only had one daughter with him. A look from my father told me that he had seen I noticed and confirmed my worst fears. Water is necessary for people to live. While I was in Canada, I would volunteer once a month with some friends of mine to work at a shelter, and at the end of the day we would serve a meal to everyone. Usually, it was spaghetti, so my job was making the sauce. I would open cans of various sauces that were available and throw the cans into the recycling bin. One day the manager came to me and said, "You can't throw those cans out like that." I said, "Like what?" He said they were dirty and I had to wash them before I could throw them in the recycling bin. Canadian municipalities have created probably the finest drinking water in the world and spend millions to get it that way every day, including chlorinating it for dental benefits. Of course, they charge their citizens for it. They charge them for what they take, then again for having to dispose of it for them, and then double that when they ask the local utility company to collect it on the municipality's behalf. That's 4 times the cost of creating the world's best drinking water just to wash your garbage. Water is necessary for people to live. On the topic of Jay. Jay's very proud to be Kikuyu and follows her beliefs on a daily basis. The Fang under King Melon and Prince Sateo are reborn. The Fang people were victims of the transatlantic and trans-Saharan slave trade for 3 centuries. Stereotyped as cannibals by slave traders and missionaries because they kept human skulls and bones of their ancestors, which they revered almost daily. Thousands of their wooden idols were burnt by the slave raiders. It was a culture destroyed. Jeffrey has been an astute observer during his time in Fangala, and I believe I have learned more from him than from Jay. The Fang have a patrilineal kinship social structure. Villages were traditionally linked through lineage, and Jeffrey believes King Melon is heading in that direction again. A very traditional approach to the future, he says. They are exogamous, particularly on the father's side. I said to Ian, "I'm not familiar with the term exogamous." Exogamy is the social norm of marrying outside one's social group. The group defines the scope and extent of exogamy, and the rules and enforcement mechanisms that ensure its continuity. Dual exogamy, in which 2 groups continually intermarry with each other, which would create a situation where Fang and Kikuyu would continue to intentionally intermarry should Jay and the prince marry. Couple this with the kinship structure and the future becomes more obvious. So, once Jay marries Prince Sateo, there will be a spouse rush from Kenya to Fangala for the Kikuyu? I queried. Apparently each Kikuyu will prosper very well because the Fang are a small population with vast resources at the moment. But Jeffrey also told me that polygamy is in practice for the Fang. Having multiple spouses? For Prince Sateo? I said, stunned. When a man is married to more than one wife at the same time, it's polygamy. When a woman is married to more than one husband at a time, it's polyandry. Jay believes in culture. She believes in Kikuyu culture, and when she becomes a Fang princess she will believe in Fang culture. At least, that's what she has told me. Is there something else? I asked, sensing there was more to the story. Under French colonial rule, the Fang were converted to Christianity, but after independence they readopted their own traditional religion, known as beer. That religion allows other religious practices, ideas, and rites to be integrated into it. A syncretic tradition among the Fang people is called Bwiti, which is a monotheistic religion celebrating Christian Easter over 4 days with group dancing, singing and psychedelic drinks. Bwiti incorporates animism, ancestor worship, and some Christianity for good measure, I suppose. Practitioners in this part of the world in centuries gone by would have been witch doctors, carrying a katanga and administering a psychedelic made from the dissociative root bark of the Tabernanthe boga plant. It's specially cultivated for the religion, to promote radical spiritual growth, to stabilize community and family structure, to meet religious requirements, and to resolve pathological problems. A Bwiti rite of passage ceremony, as well as initiation rites and acts of healing, may require the drug. The experience yields complex visions and insights anticipated to be valuable to the initiate and the chapel. A spiritual leader called Nganga, who has extensive knowledge of traditional healing practices, hexes, and spells, guides the initiate through the process. A torch made of bark and tree sap, known as the mupito, is burned.
Music and dance are central, with the participants singing and playing drums and waving shakers about. What's in the active ingredient in the iboga plant? Do you know? I asked. It's an evergreen bush indigenous to Central Africa. The yellowish root or bark is used to produce hallucinations and near-death outcomes, with occasional fatalities occurring. In high doses, ibogaine is considered to be toxic and has caused serious comorbidities when used with opioids or prescription drugs. It's a controlled substance, but I don't know if it's DMT or something like that. That's basically the effect anyway. I'm not sure how involved Jay is in this religion, or even if the royal family practices the religion. Jeffrey was unsure as well. We'll have to wait and see, but we do know Jay has accepted Prince Sateo's proposal and they are planning to be married. And that was all he had to say about that. Big Wham has been working on some interesting projects of late. Viroids, for instance, are the smallest infectious pathogens known to humankind. They're composed solely of a short strand of circular, single-stranded RNA that has no protein coating. All known viroids are inhabitants of higher plants, and most cause diseases. The plant must be an angiosperm or blooming plant to have viroids. That's the connection to Big Wham. They're composed of nucleic acid, but don't code for protein. The viroid's replication mechanism uses RNA polymerase II, which is a host cell enzyme normally associated with synthesis of messenger RNA from DNA, as you know. The human pathogen hepatitis D virus is a subviral agent similar in structure to a viroid. Wow, that's interesting. What DNA could be inserted into the viroid before it propagates? Considering it's plant-based, I wonder if a gene from the artemisinin plant containing coding for a malaria cure could be inserted with CRISPR? Ian said, viruses are small particles containing RNA or DNA and require a host cell to replicate. Some of the diseases that can or are caused by viral pathogens include smallpox, influenza, mumps, measles, chickenpox, Ebola, HIV, rubella, and COVID-19. There are some very bad actors in that bunch. We should talk to Dr. Sue about this and get her thoughts. Ian suggested. How's Kim doing with his anti-poaching efforts? I asked. Rumors are that the big bonus being paid by the Chinese businesswoman is because she believes she has an ancient formula for immortality. We know that isn't true, and the Chinese businesswoman is Beatrice Chan. She's breeding her own rhinos from the DNA of the last few existing members of the species. By eliminating those species in the wild, the value of her inventory will rise exponentially. Her supply will never seem to dry up for some reason. Everyone else will be reluctant to de-extinct any species. Look at the controversy with the thylacine and Dr. Trask's reconstructed DNA. Rhinos are just the start. She has elephants, tigers, pandas, and so many more. The Pendulum group has started to collect rare DNA to offset what we believe she is collecting. Someday we may need it, my friend.
He paused for a moment and then continued. So, Kim's focus has changed somewhat to becoming a bodyguard.
Cheesy's net is working well and has saved at least several rhinos and just as many elephants.
We may be extending it toward Faunola along with Windhaven. Jeffrey and Hamish have become quite a good team as well as very good friends. They're working together on every project they're assigned to like a team. Next month they're going back to Faunola to establish a Windhaven-style anti-poaching center for Prince Sateo's people to run as a national program.
Prince Sateo has his people installing the infrastructure in anticipation of their arrival.
Jeffrey and Hamish can fly, so I send them with Martin, and this whole trip will probably be a month.
Then they'll be back in Windhaven.
Angus and Wham are living in Faunola, but occasionally fly back when Martin needs to round out a trip with passengers going both ways. The Fawn Windhaven anti-venom laboratory is up and running in full swing. They're farming venom from snakes, spiders, and scorpions, then freeze-drying it and shipping it to Windhaven for further processing by Dr. Ben's new doctor. Big Wham, Kim, Sarah, and even Baby Goo are running things back at Windhaven, at least while Jeffrey is gone, and who knows when Jay will be coming back from Faunola, if ever. Baby Goo is as big as Wham was when I first went to Africa, which means she's probably capable of being a great deal of help. Little Joe and Dr. Emily are back in Kenya after their trip to Moldova. They created a tool with fluorine and some rare earth magnets that she hopes will help her detect vital force in 108 strategic places in the body. She also has her DNA tracking project currently underway to see how DNA changes over time, and she can also monitor Kikuyu vital force over generations. Dr. Emily may have to reconsider her workload or staffing requirements in light of the fact that she's losing her entire workforce in Jay when she leaves to marry Prince Sateo.
Hopefully you will be coming to Windhaven next summer, Ian said.
That's the plan, but the world will be changing greatly between now and then.
Yes, it will, he said, and left it at that.
Sandy and I were able to spend each morning doing our yoga together, and he was diligent in his duty of whipping me back into shape as my guru.
With Sandy, the topic of conversation generally went to either Vesna Mandik or Swami Varana.
I've spent a fair bit of time with Vesna over the last year or two trying to help her with her migraines and headaches related to the thing they call the Tesla flash. The more I work with Swami Varana, the more I believe this particular strain of mushroom can open up pathways in her mind that would release ideas that seem to want to come out. You know yourself how you felt after ingesting mushrooms, he said. Yes, it was like a clarity of thought for a period of time, but I can't tell you what the concrete change was and how long it lasted. I felt like I feel when I get something off my chest that has been bothering me for a period of time. Nothing of huge consequence, but when somebody does something minor that annoys you and you tell them about and they stop agreeably.
You feel like, okay, now I can get on with things, I offered.
Sandy concurred, yes, exactly right, relief, and that can be controlled by the brain and generally a release of serotonin. At some point I want her to come to India, not only to explore mushrooms with me but to feel the mysticism of India and realize that things are not always as they may appear.
Magda has been helping her with that as well.
While enjoying lunch one day with Sandy and Ian told us a story from his time in Canada.
He was an astute observer of the human condition.
I like observing the middle class to learn their desires and goals.
How else are we going to learn?
He said if he wanted to change the life of a poor person, he would just drop one of his 3-pound emeralds in his slipper as he slept. To change the life of a rich or noble person, a good slap across the face should do it.
On the day in question, Ian recounted an interaction he had with an elderly gentleman in the hospital cafeteria.
I stopped off to get a sandwich and spend a half an hour reading a book in the cafeteria. After selecting my sandwich, I stood in line at the cashier waiting to pay. An elderly gentleman in the line ahead of me gave the cashier a $10 note to pay for a sandwich and a coffee. "That will be $2 more, sir," the cashier told the man. I could tell by the look on his face that he was shocked at the price and fumbled about for another $2. "Add his lunch to mine," I told the cashier, and she gave him his $10 back. We sat down together and I could see he was stressed, but I figured it was because of the health of someone. After all, this was a hospital. But I said nothing. "Thank you, sir." I don't usually accept charity, but from such a handsome young doctor, I will make an exception. Things are quite expensive in the hospital. I'm here today to visit my granddaughter, Elsie. She's just having her tonsils out, but when you're 6, that can be as traumatic as any adult surgery. I would have driven my car, but parking costs 20 times as much as the bus, so I thought if I took the bus, I could have a sandwich. Everything is so expensive now and seems to be more so every day. My wife and I are average people who worked at average jobs all our lives. We started our life together thinking we could raise our family on one income and enjoy the same traditional family values that our parents provided for us, but keeping up traditions is very hard. In the early days, we struggled to put food on the table, a roof over our heads, and provide the kids with the things they needed like clothes and trips to the dentist. I ate my sandwich and let him ramble. His story was infinitely more interesting than the book I had chosen. Sure, we dreamed of having our own house, and that's when my wife and I decided we could no longer pamper the kids with a stay-at-home parent. Over the years we were able to provide more things for our family, but those things didn't seem to mean as much as they had before. A house was still not possible because the price of everything seemed to go up after every election, but our income didn't. When higher education expenses for the kids came along, we settled for having a home rather than a house. Finally, once the kids moved out, my wife and I both retired, but neither of us had a company pension plan. All those years we struggled to put what little money away we could, and today it's worth pennies on the dollar. We didn't know how to invest and had nothing to invest anyway. Don't get me wrong, Sonny. We get a healthy pension from the government that keeps a roof over our head, free healthcare should we ever get sick, and our bellies are mostly full of the things we like. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in the world, but that doesn't make it perfect, so the older I get the more I complain. You'll have to live a bit before you can complain as much as me. He smiled at me and began to eat his sandwich. His story represented a life struggle against a pendulum that was constantly pushing against his best interests like a gale-force wind. That kind of lifelong burden slowly grinds a person down, especially if they don't see any victories along the way. Sandy may be able to fathom a life like that, but you and I cannot. What would possess a person to continue to chase unachievable goals of an ever-demanding society forever? He was doing it for his family like little Elsie, and it should have earned him their love. Ian said. I'm sure little Elsie loved her grandfather. Cheesy needed to touch base with Uncle Sandu, so he put in a conference call to the Sultancy at the bonfire that night. It was great to see Marius, Marion, and Uncle Sandu. The Jacks had only recently arrived back at the Sultancy after being on the Riviera for a couple of months. We stopped in and saw the Count while we were back home. Cheesy. He didn't tell us to say hi, but your mother and sisters did. Marius told Cheesy. Nice. He's a real charmer, dear old dad. He doesn't have any more kids or wives since last I heard, does he? Cheesy asked. Not that we could see, but your sister Ava has a new baby. Marion informed him, but Cheesy was aware of that. Ava was the sister that was closest to him in age and to his heart.
"How are things on the sea?" I asked. "Construction is going on everywhere. I have more than a dozen still on the go, but the important ones are done."
"The 4 of you, over on the south end, are finished. Marius and Marion have their Canyon location and also their Bombay Beach locations. I built some modest homes for Darla, Krista, and Magda on their properties, so when you're all here the next time you will have your own homes to stay in."
"That's great, Uncle Sandu. What would we do without you? You make our lives easy." I told him, and everyone agreed. "My pleasure. The Temple of the Sun is coming along now that we have the base down. The upper building will be a year, and then the interior will be a year. The circus arena should fit in that timeline as well and come together as a big package. Mark that date in your calendar, boys. That's going to be a great night, a couple of years from now." "How are the Jack-in-the-Box restaurants doing?" I asked on Rick's behalf. He had asked me if I could find out before he left. Even his 1/3 of a share of the Salton Sea investments that he split with Lance and Rowdy was making him a very wealthy man. Uncle Sandu replied, "According to Carl, we are the Jack-in-the-Box since we gained effective control of the corporation. We have more restaurants in China than in North America now, even with the new Mexican and Canadian sites included. Korea, Japan, and Australia are all coming online next year. We are the largest fast food restaurant chain in the world, bar none. That chicken-hawking colonel, the taco-pushing dog, and the burger-flipping clown together couldn't muster an army against JIB." Marius informed us, "The commercials are still a huge success in every country after all these years. It's like starring in a mini-series because we have to shoot a new commercial every 6 weeks or so it seems. Heidi and Holly are a continual pain in the ass every time we have a celebrity on the commercial. The commercials are all they do. Well, the commercials and their father's show, which is still on the air. They've made a career out of it. Hialeah won't let us on his show anymore. I think he's afraid of us." "Aren't we paying them?" I asked. "Heidi and Holly are on our payroll." Cheesy thought for a moment and said, "Wait a minute. That's right. Now that we own Jack-in-the-Box. As soon as it's more than we want to pay, we'll terminate their contracts. It doesn't behoove us to bite off our nose to spite our face. Whatever we're paying them, we're making a ton more," Marion pointed out. "Okay, but I'm planning our exit strategy right now," Cheesy said and began considering ideas. I was pretty sure he would be talking with Lorenzo, his partner in crime, later that night. Richard had to figure in his plans too, and perhaps Henri Cel-Trodat. A new series of Aztec burgers will be coming out ahead of the Cel-Trodat Hotel at the Salton Sea, but they're down the road a bit. Of course, they've already begun to plan them. In one, JIB is going to be abducted by an alien who wants to steal the new flame-broiled Aztec pepper burger for his alien burger chain on Perseus Omicron 3. Uncle Sandu said, "This is going to be an important year for Transnistria too. Once the Tesla power generation is known to be generated from Transnistria, there will be people who want to bring it down and restore the old world. General Anipov has begun to address that in advance of the new year. Internal security for Transnistria will be directed by 2 of his loyal comrades from his Soviet army days. General Dmitry Rostov will be in charge of security around the Earth Resonance Plant site, while General Yuri Popov will be placed in charge of border security. Transnistria is a small county with less than 1 million in population even at then. With workers moving into the energy plant and the automotive plant, there will be a large influx of people whom Carl will be trying to convince to become citizens. Currently 1 million people working in the country and 500,000 senior citizens collecting their pensions can manage because the pensions are very low. Carl projects this to double every year because they're going to offer citizenship after only 2 years residence in the country. It's such a good deal that people should jump at the chance. Technically, this is a democracy, but it's also going to be extremely socialist, almost to the point of communist. If you become a citizen of Transnistria, you will have government-paid healthcare plan, including prescriptions, dental care for all members of the family, unemployment insurance should you ever find yourself out of work, disability should you ever be injured at work, and pensions for every year that you work, and so much more. The personal income tax system is possibly my favorite. Personal income tax will not be assessed until the family earns their base living requirement for the year. A base requirement for a standard of living that citizens deem is acceptable or as a government-supplied minimum must be earned before any tax is assessed. How does that work? Lorenzo asked, but clearly Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur were interested too. Then it dawned on me. Cheesy and I would probably never consider this, but to everyone who had to earn a living, this was paramount. Errol added, "Can we get Australia to jump on board the Carl train?" Carl explained it like this: if you're filing your tax as a family of 4, 2 parents and 2 children, you file as a group. Standards can be maintained by area, rural or suburban environment, determining what your family needs to live in a fashion that maintains human dignity within the current society. That will include a true basket of goods. It will include absolutely everything that the family needs and bury things like utilities and government surcharges as they do today in calculations of cost of living indexes in the Western world. Those were Carl's words. After that amount, it will be a flat tax of 15% regardless of the amount you earn. No complicated tax laws or special exemptions. How can you tax someone below the poverty line? Uncle Sandhu asked us rhetorically. Ian agreed with him. It just doesn't make sense, does it, Uncle Sandhu? Uncle Sandhu added, "It will be a good thing to be a citizen of Transnistria." Ian added, "Yes, King Melon is adopting similar policies for his people after a long discussion we had with Carl and the Baroness." Ian went on to say, "President Alexandria is an international star on the rise. She's seen as the savior of a country that the Soviet Union threw out with the trash when it distilled itself down to its essence. The United States have granted full status and established full diplomatic relations with Transnistria. Can you guess who the new ambassador from the United States is going to be?" The Poison Voice. Cheesy volunteered. "No, mate, the twins. Twin ambassadors, never been done before," Errol suggested. The new ambassador to Transnistria from the United States will be the RT Honorable Richard Wadden II. Dickwad Jr., and a gasp went up as everyone was amazed at how things were becoming so connected. Alexandria is building up the pendulum infrastructure in the country as a base for the world. Once we announce that the world will be getting free energy, we'll have to protect it. The glory of this solution is that it's not an expensive solution to implement. It's the knowledge of how to do this that's key, and once that's released, free energy will never be a thing of the past because they will not be able to undo it. It only requires one installation to set the system in process for the whole world. Transnistria will be our initial focus, but we're establishing backups that can be redeployed in just days. It's the technology that's important here. Knowledge that Dr. Roz and Florin have brought to the world.
The world continues to consider solutions to the fossil fuel issue, but most scenarios end with the world only letting go when they run out.
Let's consider our current consumption of fossil fuels for a moment.
Electricity continues to be seen as the fuel of the future, with global electricity demand growing to more than 30,000 TWh. Rapid growth is pushing electricity towards a 20% share of total final consumption of energy around the world. That's great because by slapping a rechargeable battery on whatever's draining that energy, it's powered for life. Most of the demand for energy in the world at that time fell on fossil energy such as oil, gas, and coal, with 72% opting for fossil fuel, 25% for renewables, and a measly 3% for the friendly nuclear option. If the Pendulum Group did nothing, oil would have ended in 30 years, gas in 40 years, and coal would have lasted, wheezing and coughing, for another 70 years from that time. Coal may only have lasted another 70 years, but there's a coal fire in Pennsylvania that will burn for the next 500 years. Global oil supplies roughly 40% of the world's energy, with 96% of its transportation energy. Gas won the bronze medal in total electricity generation, 2 steps below coal, which was standing proudly on top, hacking up a lung. The contributions of solar have never met expectations and are a disappointment. If you consider how long solar technology has been around, it should have become much more efficient than it is today. It was around when the first personal computers came onto the market. Which technology has improved more? Perhaps not a fair comparison. Wind would never solve the problems of the world's energy needs, but it will always power a sailing vehicle on the water or land, to my father's great pleasure. Electrical batteries are commonly used in solar energy applications as well as wind-generated power storage. Lead-acid batteries are well suited to trickle charging with a high electrical output charging efficiency. Wind turbines can also use excess power to compress air in large above-ground tanks, then use that air through compressed air motors. Pumped storage is a concept associated with hydroelectric power generation, where water is pumped to an elevated reservoir utilizing excess generated power that can't be stored. Gravity uses the water to drive a turbine and benefit from that extra power later in the day. All very nice ideas, and each contribute a small amount in an innovative way if chipping away at the future of fossil fuels was an option. Hydro dams generate clean energy but destroy the land they need to flood to feed their turbines. Lake Gordon is a perfect example of the impact on the environment, but the world has many bad examples to choose from. The Three Gorges Dam in China buried thousands upon thousands of ancient shrines and temples and displaced millions of people. Northern Quebec and the territory of the Cree people in Canada was a horrible environmental disaster when land was flooded without removing the trees. Tidal dams may have been a novel solution but are no longer required. Macquarie Harbour in Tasmania would have made an ideal tidal dam with high tides, large surface area to fill, and a narrow entrance to block. With a tidal dam, energy is generated on the way in and then again on the ebb. Twice a day like clockwork. More than 10% of the world's electricity was produced from nuclear energy. Safer thorium-based nuclear reactors were touted as the future of energy at that time, but that future wasn't necessary anymore, thankfully. Many of the installations utilizing energy-generating solutions were state-owned companies or represented a significant portion of the state's tax structure. A new Tesla museum is being located near the Earth Resonance Center in Krasnenko. I'm told Krasnenko is a very pretty place in the spring when the flowers are in bloom. There's a lot of construction tearing up those beautiful flowers at the moment because King Melon has also begun building the Tesla automobile factory there as well. It will be a mammoth plant to build enough electric cars for a world that's replacing fossil fuel. He's also building a gigafactory for battery creation.
The workforce will likely triple the population of Transnistria.
New infrastructure is being built in Tiraspol as well, with an expansion to the central bank, which will include enough room to store a portion of the increasing pendulum resources, which include precious metal reserves. The natural response for people once the news is released will be to buy gold or other precious metals.
The price is better now, I think. United Nations Secretary General Anapov was busy as well.
With his advanced knowledge of what's coming, he couldn't be seen to be making irrational moves. The general had to be subtle but purposeful if he was to position himself to be in the right place at the right time when the world learns that its dependence on fossil fuel is over. The Earth Resonance Project will change the world, I have no doubt of that. I wish I could say for the better in all ways and be certain. Humankind has a way of changing things when personal gain is involved. Dr. Roz and her two teams, led by Dr. Jagger and Dr. Beret, assure us that the project will be ready to go on day 1 of the new year.
Ian told us.
A couple of days later, it was time for us all to return to our day-to-day workaday lives.
Stephanie needed to return to the Salton Sea while Sandy was off to India. Ian was heading to Krasnenko to see the progress on the Earth Resonance Center for himself.
Dr. Roz had promised him some new insights into the process.
Lorenzo had a date with the Jacks on the Salton Sea, so he was heading off to San Diego with Stephanie.
I'm not sure it was totally business, because the Jacks had become good friends with Lorenzo, which was understandable considering his friendship with Cheesy, whom the Jacks looked on as a brother. Errol, Cheesy and I had to return to Hobart to pick up where we left off. We were all doctors by then, so we should have been excited about the prospect of it opening up doors for our business, but in reality, with the funding we had, there were never any doors that were closed for us. Settling back into our comfortable roles, I had some time to try to piece together exactly what's going on with the Earth Resonance Project, but physics was not my forte.
Cheesy and Errol contributed with what they knew, and Florin was a great deal of help, but I was not sure exactly how this was going to be implemented. Maybe that's a good thing, because the less people who could figure it out, the better it would be, perhaps. Florin told me there's a great deal of construction under the tower which people are not familiar with.
They look at a tower 50 meters into the sky and don't think that it goes that far again into the ground. And that's just the start of its subterranean journey. It's necessary to establish a ground connection, so a 10 by 12-foot shaft was sunk into the ground 50 meters beneath the tower. Dr. Roz lined the shaft with a huge waveguide which is going to shape the reflective energy surge. At the bottom of the shaft, metal pipe segments, one after another, to a total of 40, were sent into the ground. Sending a current through metal at that depth will take hold in the earth with such a grip as to make the entire globe quiver. At least that's what Tesla said in his notes. Florin also told me tunnels head out from the bottom of the shaft in all 4 cardinal directions to send energy into the atmosphere. They enhance ground connection with the Schumann resonance by interacting with the water table and conductivity of the ground. The capital of the 50-meter tower has intense ultraviolet beacons to create an ionized path up through the atmosphere to conduct electricity. I did actually get to talk to Dr. Roz on several occasions, but they were extremely rare and succinct one-sided conversations.
Errol and I just listened. We would never ask Dr. Roz a question.
Tesla, the poor boy, intended to condense the energy trapped between the Earth and the upper atmosphere to transform it into an electric current. In his mind's eye, he saw the sun as an immense ball of electricity, positively charged with a potential of some hundreds of billions of volts. The Earth, on the other hand, charged with negative electricity.
The tremendous electrical force between those two bodies constituted, partly, what he called cosmic energy.
Different in the night from the day and from season to season, but still, it's always there. Just like the sun and the moon and our good friend Schumann. The positive particles are stopped at the ionosphere, and between that and the negative charges already in the conductive earth ground, some 100 kilometers or so below, there's a large difference of voltage, perhaps in the order of 360,000 volts. With the gases of the atmosphere acting as an insulator between the two opposite stores of electrical charges, the region between the ground and the edge of space traps all that energy. Despite the large size of the planet, it keeps positive and negative charges apart by using the air as a non-conducting material or insulator.
Brilliant!
People assume the Casimir force is of little or no practical use because the two plates must come together to create a vacuum fluctuation battery. Borscht! The battery can be recharged by making the electrical forces slightly stronger than the Casimir force to re-expand the plates. Any pair of conducting plates at close distances experience an attractive Casimir force that's due to the electromagnetic zero-point fluctuations of the vacuum. That is why I named my cat Casimir. By applying a charge of the same polarity to each conducting plate, a repulsive electrostatic force will be produced to oppose the Casimir force. Always less than the Casimir force, and the plates will move towards each other, adding energy to the electric field between the plates. Recharge the battery by making the electrical forces slightly stronger than the Casimir force to re-expand the foliated conductor. She concluded that particular speech and left the room as abruptly as she had entered. Errol and I looked at each other and didn't want to ask the other how much of that made sense at the time. The Earth charge was measured in something called coulombs. They had a potential of 360,000 volts. The Earth constitutes a capacitor of 0.25 farads, where farads are calculated by dividing coulombs by volts.
Totally meaningless information to Errol and I.
However, using those numbers in calculations tells those who do know what they mean that there is 4.5 megawatt-hours of electrical energy available. We were told that if we wanted to utilize that high-voltage energy, we must make something called an energy sink and find a way to make that sink oscillate so that we could drain the energy out and use it. A sink must be at a lower energy state than the medium surrounding it. The energy continually flows into it and is continually pumped out. It must maintain a lower energy state while meeting the power requirements of the load attached to it. Electrical energy, watt-seconds, is a product of volts times amps times seconds. Because the period of oscillation doesn't change, either voltage or current must be the variable in the system's energy equation, I was told. A bifilar wound coil maximizes the voltage difference between its turns to minimize the current. It's an electromagnetic coil that contains two closely spaced, parallel windings of wire made of two filaments or strands. The parallel wound, series-connected bifilar coil was a Nikola Tesla patent, 512,340. Capacity between the parallel windings was charged by the increased voltage difference between the series-connected windings. It was possible for the coil to hold a greatly increased amount of energy in its electric field, as well as lowering the resonant frequency of the coil dramatically. Some coils had adjacent coils in which the convolutions were arranged so that the potential difference was magnified by the current flowing in the same parallel direction. Others were wound so that the current flowed in the opposite direction. The magnetic field created by one winding was equal and opposite to the other, resulting in a net magnetic field of zero. During the zero-point cycle, energy was taken into the coil through the small energy window known as the zero point, which was the key to the success of the system. It's at the zero point where energy is condensed into positive and negative. When energy escapes from the sink, the magnetic field collapses and a strong magnetic quake is created. Tesla's free energy system was a self-oscillating capacitive system. Very little power expended to keep it going. A small amount of charge moves through the system per cycle, which I think of as Cheesy's modified Schumann resonances. Tesla's radiant energy receiver stored static electricity obtained from the air and converted it to a usable form. A simple version of Th. More's device actually. The direct conversion of ionized particles generated by radiant matter directly converted to electrical power. It's that transfer of energy used for practical purposes. I remember one particular day when Florin tried to explain it to me. Right this moment, 2,000 thunderstorms are rolling over the earth, producing 50 flashes of lightning every second. Each lightning burst creates electromagnetic waves that begin to circle around the earth. These are captured between the earth's surface and a boundary about 60 miles up. Some of the waves, if they've just the right wavelength, will combine, increasing in strength, to create a repeating atmospheric heartbeat known as the Schumann resonance. If you can add one of Dr. Raza's waveguides to the system, you have control of the strength, but also how many actually combine. From that resonance, you can deduce the Earth's weather, its electric environment, and it's even possible to determine what types of atoms and molecules exist in Earth's atmosphere. That's mind-boggling how such information can be extracted from waves that are traveling around the world collecting it. The waves created by lightning don't look like the up and down waves of the ocean. They oscillate with regions of greater energy and lesser energy. They remain trapped inside an atmospheric ceiling created by the lower edge of the ionosphere. That is a part of the atmosphere filled with charged particles that begins about 100 kilometers into our sky. The sweet spot for resonance requires the wave to be as long as the circumference of the Earth. An extremely low frequency wave that can be as low as 8 Hz or 100,000 times lower than the lowest frequency radio waves used to send signals to an AM/FM radio. As this wave flows around Earth, it hits itself again at the perfect spot such that the crests and troughs are aligned. Voila, waves acting in resonance with each other to pump up the original signal. Brought to you by Dr. Raza's waveguide. And I could see Travis and TM are surfing off on the wave and finally winning a surfing contest. The sensors used to measure Schumann resonances typically consisted of 2 horizontal magnetic inductive coils for measuring the north-south and east-west components of the magnetic field, as well as a vertical electric dipole antenna for measuring the vertical component of the electric field. For what was being planned, that was not going to be nearly good enough. Exact measurement, as well as an ability to modify and change it, were key factors in moving forward. A typical passband of the instruments was 3 to 100 Hz. The Schumann resonance electric field amplitude was much smaller than the static fair weather electric field in the atmosphere. Similarly, the amplitude of the Schumann resonance magnetic field was 1 picotesla, which was many orders of magnitude smaller than the Earth's magnetic field of 30 to 50 microteslas. Specialized receivers and antennas were created to detect and record Schumann resonances so they could be manipulated. Florin told me determining the spatial lightning distribution from Schumann resonance records proved a complex problem. To estimate the lightning intensity from Schumann resonance records, it was necessary to account for both the distance to lightning sources and the wave propagation between the source and the observer. Recognizing locations proved to be a factor in the electromagnetic waves in the system. Razi determined the lightning distribution based on the decomposition of the average background Schumann resonance spectra, utilizing ratios between the average electric and magnetic spectra and between their linear combination.
What a technique! It assumes the cavity is spherically symmetric and therefore doesn't include known cavity asymmetries that affect the resonance and propagation properties. Exact measurements and calculations will be easily maintained and monitored going forward. Diurnal variations of the background Schumann resonance power had to also be accounted for. These reflected the properties of both global lightning activity and the state of the Earth ionosphere cavity between the source region and the observer. Another critical element in maintaining the resonance. The diurnal, or nighttime, behavior of the vertical electric field required three distinct adjustments because of three major hotspots occurring during that time included the daily peak of thunderstorm activity from the peak of Southeast Asia lightning activity, the peak of African lightning activity, and the peak of South American lightning activity. The time and amplitude of the peaks vary throughout the year, linked to seasonal changes in lightning activity. Cheesy told me, it's all mathematics and software once Dr. Roz applies her physics formulas and calculations. I found out that the African peak was the strongest, reflecting the major contribution of the African chimney to global lightning activity. That's the effect of Nye coming down to Earth and using lightning as his transport. The Asian and American spikes are significant, but I guess Nye doesn't make it there as often. Determining the lightning source characteristics meant resolving each individual flash. Extremely large lightning flashes occurred which produced distinctive signatures that stand out from the background signals. Those are Q bursts, produced by intense lightning strikes and transfer large amounts of charge from clouds to the ground and carry high peak current. That was important according to Florin because of the source of energy flowing into the system to be taken out later. Not everything was capable of charging automatically because not everything had a battery attached to it at that time. Manufacturing had to eventually come up with innovative plans to make all devices mobile. To do that, the world must make more efficient batteries, and so many more of them. The cost of batteries is the reason electric cars aren't cheaper than gas cars already, and it's not labor driving down the cost of batteries, it's robots. They are the machinery that makes the tiny individual cells that go into a larger Tesla battery pack. Tesla's Gigafactory produced more batteries that year than were produced worldwide 10 years previously. A gigafactory was designed as a massive photovoltaic cell factory with large ones to supplement the demands of companies like Tesla. Giga Austin, Giga Berlin, and a second Giga Shanghai was on the way at that time. And the existing ones double in size, and they all keep doubling. I told Mary that this was what was needed to soak up all that free energy. Of course, if gold coins are all over the ground, you need something to gather them up in, or someone else is going to grab them. You're right, feed of the fueling greed. Charging batteries was another essential step in the process. Electricity can charge batteries fast if necessary, but the speed of the transfer is balanced by the thickness of the wire containing the transfer if you want to avoid explosions and fires. The rule of thumb with skinny wire was that you can't transfer much power, but if you have a big fat wire, then let the power flow. Florin tells me that in a constant charging situation, such as this, that even a small wire will suffice. The more important factor was the capacity of the battery and the consumption of the tool, so that there was always a sufficient amount of energy in the battery to operate while charging. Very simple calculations. This is all too much physics for a brain that should be focused on DNA. If a terrorist explains to you in great detail how they're planning to build a bomb and blow up a village, does your logical response to them change if you understand the language they're speaking at you? Dick would say yes, because his response would not have been to try to negotiate with the terrorist that eventually shot him 4 times and resulted in him being shipped home. Unfortunately, the injury was serious enough to get him discharged from active duty with the Army, but he's already out of the hospital. The injuries were serious and have caused him to walk with a limp,
but he's going to spend his recovery time with Sandy in India. He'll be there when Rick, Darla and Krista are there, and I'll wager dying to go with them. When he called me to explain his injury, he told me it was time for him to commit to Ian and the Pendulum Group. I had a conversation with Carl about the upcoming announcement and how it was going to impact the world. Dick's granddad, or Dickwad Sr. as he was affectionately known, was going to get a 24-hour advance notice on the rest of the world for his efforts on behalf of General Anapov, and Carl was considering what he would reinvest his money in. After the collapse of oil stock and all things fossil fuel, what will Granddad be looking to buy? Gold? A ridiculous choice, but a very likely choice even if it's only for a short time. Cryptocurrencies? No. Granddad is a bricks and mortar man. He should buy as much of Texas as he can. Houston, Dallas, and Galveston real estate will all be bargains, but what will they be used for? Cattle? We also don't know if governments are going to try and save some companies by supporting their stocks or let market forces have their way. That will be a critical decision in each country with a stock market. Carl told me. What do you think they should do? I asked him. Let the stock market do what it's supposed to do. Shake out the winners and the losers. We already know that there is no point in saving them, they do not. We know there will no future for fossil fuels, but many politicians won't know that. They'll see lots of their voters out of work and try to demonstrate that they're trying to help them. It's good money after bad, but it may save them some votes. This is how Ian is going to slow the pendulum's initial thrusts. By allowing Dick's grandfather to begin his sell-off early, it should begin the avalanche early. Once midnight hits, avalanche may be too tame a word. Ian would never have given Dickwad Sr. this advantage as payback for the Sultancy. I hope. The expression military-industrial complex describes the relationship between a country's military and the defense industry that supplies it, seen together as a vested interest which influences public policy. They've been milking patents for decades, just as Eisenhower told everyone back in the day. Both sides benefit. Dick told Ian and I a few months previously, this type of relationship is most prevalent in the United States, although not limited to the United States. Close links exist between defense contractors, the Pentagon, and politicians. It's been extended to include U.S. Congress to form something they call the Iron Triangle. We all knew about the Iron Curtain, but not everyone knows about the Iron Triangle. At least one of them has come down. Its three legs include political contributions, political approval for military spending, lobbying to support bureaucracies, and oversight of the industry. Money and resources flow among individuals, corporations, and institutions, defense contractors, private military contractors, the Pentagon, Congress, and the executive branch. You may strike a blow against this structure and undermine it, but let me warn you that they will just need to start a war to rise again. They have reserve technology they've been waiting to produce for when the world is ready for it. Let me tell you, it better be ready now. They may need a war to refuel their momentum. I found out that King Melon would be getting a 24-hour notice as well, but this one was more curious to me. Why was Ian giving the king an advantage on the rest of the world? Has Ian become beholden to the king for some reason that I don't know of? I found out later that King Melon agreed to pass the savings of electric car manufacturing in the future on to the consumer. Ian said the king agreed to drop the price of an electric car in half even though he would be losing his country's fortune in oil reserves. The 24-hour notice was meant to allow him to move his people inland from the coast where foreign oil workers would want to get out of the country quickly. They may possibly destroy the infrastructure that they have built before they leave, but that could kill millions.
Everybody has greed. Some people have more greed than others, but I don't think that's the determining factor in who ultimate proves to be greedy. Greedy will impact the karma a person can earn from the dharma they generate in the future. At least as much dharma as a greedy person can generate. The impetus to push the greed pendulum past its pivot comes from opportunity. Khalil Gibran, the prophet, told us, 3 things come not back: the spent arrow, the spoken word, and the missed opportunity. Next year will be the first year the earth will begin to breathe again as it gets relief from fossil fuels. People will be busy rebuilding their lives from whatever impact they experience in the changing world. This should give us good opportunities to improve life for all life around the world. We decided not to fly to Moldova for the broadcast because we weren't sure whether or not we would be able to get home once the news reached the world. The announcement was broadcasted from Moldavia at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. Cheesy, Errol and I watched with Mary, Uncle Artis and Uncle Arthur crowded onto 2 large, overstuffed sofas while Travis and TMR paced around behind them nervously picking at the snack table that Mary had laid out. I've never been privy to such important information before. Imagine waiting for the rest of the world to learn what I already know. Mary told us while displaying her best Cheshire cat grin but couldn't resist slapping Cheesy on the thigh. World leaders, religious leaders, and major corporations were all notified of this broadcast. Whether or not they understood who the Pendulum Group was or the impact of the message they were about to deliver would soon become obvious. The presentation opened with Ian standing at the podium in the Cell Trottet study with the large window behind him and the Moldavian moon shining brightly through it on what appeared to a knowledgeable eye such as mine, a cold crisp New Year's night. On his left side was Vesna Mandik and on his right was Dr. Roz. I could see others scattered about the room, including the Baroness, Uncle Sandu, and Carl. Ian began, Earth's dependence on fossil fuels are a thing of the past effective now. He paused for just a second as he waited for the system to be activated. The family of Nikola Tesla and the Pendulum Group have installed the new Earth Resonance Tower in Krasnenko, Transnistria, which will provide free electric energy to the entire world absolutely free of charge. If you haven't noticed already, every rechargeable battery you own anywhere in the world has been fully recharged in the past few minutes and will remain fully charged throughout its useful life. Humans will no longer need to pollute the earth with fossil fuels when all our energy needs are now provided with a clean, free solution. No more oil will need to be burned to produce fumes polluting our atmosphere or simply being dumped in our oceans on its way to its destination to be burned. No more coal will need to be burned to produce toxic lung disease on its way to pollute the air and human lungs. No more gas will need to be burned, which requires pipelines with environmental impacts on our wildlife today and for generations to come to reach its destination. No more nuclear power will require the disposal of its waste by humans so far into the future that it's longer than those humans have existed in the past. No more dams will be required to destroy the habitat of both humans and wildlife. Today is only possible due to the innovative work of Dr. Rosny Gregorine and her staff and to the immense generosity of the descendants of Nikola Tesla whose work Dr. Gregorine applied to create this solution. The world will come to know Dr. Gregorine and her staff in the days to follow, but at this moment I would like to introduce Vesna Mandik. Ms. Mandik is Mr. Tesla's closest living relative and represents all of Mr. Tesla's descendants. She who would like to make a brief statement. And he turned the podium over to Vesna. She stood there for a moment before she began. When Nikola was a very young man, he truly understood what mankind was doing to this world through the use of natural and man-made atmospheric pollutants. Nikola became the first human to understand global warming and the greenhouse effects of fossil fuels in a moment of a grand vision. He knew it was his destiny to free humankind from the burden of extracting,
pumping, transporting, and burning fossil fuels as a sinful waste of their time. Many people took credit for the ideas of Nikola, but he would say, I don't care that they stole my idea. I care that they don't have any ideas of their own. He also said, let the future tell the truth and evaluate each according to their work and accomplishments. The present may be theirs, but the future, for which I have really worked, is mine. That future is today, and we are happy to help bring his vision about. And the room exploded with applause. I'm sure, like the rest of the world, so did we. Pendulums around the world were swinging faster than royal heads in denial at that exact moment. Personal pendulums, country pendulums, religious pendulums, and the pendulums of every organism on the planet. Some will fly past their pivots, but many will not. Hopefully Ian and Carl have provided some resistance for the ones they view as critical to the survival of humankind. What will it take to help as many pendulums as possible find a new equilibrium and not fly past their pivots? What should religions do? Should religions be grateful for the savings on utilities for their facilities, which was probably one of their largest expenses? They should be happy for their parishioners who will be able to provide more of the necessities of life to their families. They should also comfort and offer assistance to their parishioners who may have lost their jobs during the transition. What should religions not do? They shouldn't see it as an opportunity to extract more donations from their parishioners in a desire to purchase additional golden idols. This type of behavior may be risky when the bull only has one leg. What should dictators, potentates, kings, queens, or anyone else in charge of a country do? Dictators and potentates are going to do just what dictators and potentates want to do. If they're motivated by self-interest, they'll try and find a way to extract it all for themselves. Greed runs high in this group, I believe. If it were possible, this may be the time to become a benevolent dictator, because the masses may not see the purpose of going forward with them holding them back. As far as our kings and queens, or any other royalty in this group goes, there probably isn't enough effective DNA to blow their collective noses anyway. King Melon fits into this group, but I believe we can hand him a handkerchief. What should dictators, potentates, kings, or anyone else in charge of a country not do? Get out of bed. Just lie back and have another cappuccino and biscotti. This too shall pass. What should communist countries do? There are nearly as many different varieties of communist countries as there are democratic countries in the world today. Having never lived in a communist country, it's always a mystery as to how they function. Obviously, when you get right down to it, they are all individuals like the citizens of any other country, and the environment varies at the top with the politicians. They should be a classless system where production is owned communally and private property is non-existent or at least severely curtailed. Common ownership of all resources. Social equality. This should be a boon for all citizens when the country benefits like this. Many communist countries are in remote areas. Without requiring fossil fuel or any type of hydrogrid, people will be able to run equipment from the North Pole to the South Pole wirelessly. This opens up massive new opportunities for all of these countries. What should communist countries not do? See it as an opportunity to take it all for the state and not let the individuals prosper equally. Trickle it down, Putin. Don't stop the advance of a new younger generation. What should democratic countries do? Democracies exist in as many different forms as political parties can package and design, but their common element is the party in the election, regardless of the level. With only half the people showing up to vote and only a simple majority required to carry the day, in a two-party system, less than a third can carry the day. Perhaps the third will not be sufficient to hold back the pendulum when the resistance comes from the other two-thirds who finally decide to speak now. They must support their banks, let their stocks carry themselves, and help their people who may need retraining or support. Integrate new technology and ride the wave it into the future with zest and gusto.
What should democratic countries not do?
Play party politics and create opposition for advantage. This should be a time of prosperity and cooperation. Those countries who do will do best. If the democracy has a socialist perspective, then many of their programs may lose their funding due to the reduction of tax collection by the various government levels.
Government salaries and pensions may be affected by it.
They should deeply feel the impact of job loss and the impact of financial loss from a human perspective. If the democracy has a capitalist bent, they certainly won't appreciate the loss of tax revenue and will try to support the stock market, undo the effects of free energy, and create tariffs on the energy. Failing that, try a surtax or a value-added tax. They're popular and simple to implement.
What should people do? Everything good. What should people not do? Nothing bad.
Tesla said, if hate were electricity, it could light up the world. The presentation went on all night and other channels popped up everywhere with people analyzing what was going on in the world, recommending paths to take, and we watched all night and into the next day until we fell asleep in a giant heap. What would you do? What would you not do?